Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. This is our live stream and Q&A for the week of September 2nd. Hopefully, you're all enjoying your Tuesday so far. We took the week off last week. It was my birthday. I was out of town, and so we decided just to take the week off. But we did get to actually reunite in San Diego this past weekend, and that was pretty cool. Had a trip down there and we got to meet up, so that was pretty fun. And we got to see each other. We do this remote all the time. We live pretty far away from each other, but we've been friends since college, so it was really good to meet up and hang out for a little bit. And now we're back to do our live stream and Q&A. So as always, make sure you're sending in your questions, comments, theories, anything you'd like to discuss into the chat. We will be taking them first come, first serve. If you'd like to bypass that first come, first serve, we will be taking questions that pertain to the topics we're going to discuss. We have 2 weeks worth of topics to discuss tonight and two big topics to discuss in the world of Star Wars news in a time period where we don't really get much Star Wars news. We've got 2 weeks worth of fairly decently sized news to discuss. We're going to talk about those things, including all the updates around Star Wars Starfighter, which we've been talking about a lot of this stuff leading up to tonight's show, over the last few weeks as leaks started to come out. Now a lot of official word has been put out there about the casting, as well as the fact that they've just started shooting as well, which is a great sign for a movie that's coming out a little less than 2 years from now. So that's a good thing for Star Wars Starfighter. We're also going to talk about Visions and the released episodes, as well as which ones are sequels, how it all ties to season 1, and when it's all coming out. We're going to talk about that, as well as some minor news stories like the announcement of the Jaws of Jakku Audible original coming out, continuing with that Audible partnership for Star Wars. So some pretty cool stuff to discuss tonight, but your guys' topics, your questions are the centerpiece of the show. So you send those into the chat. First come, first serve. If you'd like to bypass it again, ask a question or comment about the topic we're on. Also, you can send in a Patreon, or you could join our Patreon, and YouTube membership programs. Both give you priority chat access if you're of a certain tier. So make sure you do so. If you're on Patreon, DM us your name from YouTube, and then we will prioritize your chats, or just send in your comments on that specific YouTube or Patreon post, and we will get to it. If you're on YouTube, you should get prompted a super chat on YouTube, which will bump you up to the top, supports the show, and we will answer your question immediately after we're done with the current topic we are on. All right, let's get into our first topic tonight, everybody. It's going to be the Star Wars Starfighter news, which big news coming from Starfighter. It feels like we've been talking about Starfighter, especially for the last month or so, almost every single week. There's been some type of new casting announcement or news story about this project, and we've known that this was really starting to take off. And now officially on StarWars.com, Lucasfilm and Disney have revealed the main cast list for Star Wars Starfighter, as well as also revealing that the film has started filming with the release of our first image from Starfighter, which shows Ryan Gosling and the new actor Flynn Gray sitting on a little speeder here that shows that we kind of had heard the rumors that they were going to be maybe a father-son duo, or at least he was protecting this child, and a bunch of people were after him. It seems like that is the case, as the two of them are set here, obviously kind of indicating that they are the co-leads, or the lead and co-star of the film. But the big surprises with the casting, yes, we got the confirmation finally about Mia Goth and Matt Smith, but the name's Aaron Piere, who's a name you might not be super aware of right now, but he is going to be playing John Stewart in the new Lanterns show for HBO next year, which I'm very excited about as a Green Lantern fan. So he'll be playing John Stewart, who's one of the big four Green Lanterns, probably the second most well known because of his appearances in the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated shows that we grew up with, our generation grew up with. So that's really exciting. But the big name that kind of came out of nowhere, Amy Adams, who has never been in Star Wars and just kind of like, a fairly prestigious actor at this point. I feel like I haven't seen her in much lately, but she is somebody who's very familiar with the Disney brand. She's been in, basically the thing that kickstarted her as a star was Enchanted, and she has been a part of this kind of Disney family since then. So it's not surprising to see her in a Disney project, but the fact that she's such a big name and we never heard anything about her leading up to this, because the other two biggest names in this announcement we had heard about with Matt Smith and Mia Goth, having Amy Adams in this kind of adds a little bit of prestige to it as well. Now you got Ryan Gosling and Amy Adams, both of whom have been, elite A-list stars at some points in their career, and Ryan Gosling still is. This is a prestige project, and they once again confirm that this is a standalone adventure, which I think is interesting. We've talked a lot about that in the past, whether this truly will be standalone or they're just kind of trying to hype up the fact that anybody can go watch this. You don't have to have seen a bunch of other stuff to watch it. I'm sure if it makes money, they will make more. But yeah, Sonic, the new casting announcement, the first image. What did you think of the additions to the cast, the confirmations we've gotten, and just the fact that this thing is already in production and seems to be going really, really smoothly?
I'm not surprised by the smoothness of it. That is definitely a hallmark of Shawn Levy films and just any work that he's been on. I think everybody knows that at this point in his career, his like the ground level for his filmmaking is good, entertaining fun. And then when he gets to really stretch himself, kind of like he does with Stranger Things, yeah, like you do get to see some really strong action. You get to see some really strong performances from a lot of the different actors and crew that he, brings onto his projects. Like this is a guy who, you know, doesn't necessarily like inspire like, oh, greatness, but like it's gonna start and it's gonna finish and it's gonna be in theaters. And that's something Star Wars has needed. It'll be 7 years before Mandalorian Grogu, and you can't even really truly count that in some ways because that is a season 4 post strikes kind of turned into a film. What Disney just reevaluating so much of their TV series and being like, hey, yeah, maybe we need to start making these into movies and actually get our profits back from all this money that we're investing. Streaming doesn't work like many movies, and needs to still work as TV shows still. So yeah, this is all great to hear. It's surprising that they got to sneak in, Aaron Piere and Amy Adams, like, they're like, it's those are not nobody names at this point. Those are names that are gonna have pop culture relevance from not just, current day Lanterns casting, but also Amy Adams. She's no slouch. I think for her, unfortunately, she's had a bit of a slump when it comes to her career. Not a lot of big hits. I wanna say, like, ever since unfortunately, she was cast as, like, Lois Lane in the DCEU, I haven't really
Yeah.
seen much from her that's, like, been very inspiring. I know she did, like, stuff like Hillbilly Elegy and all that, and just a lot of stuff that's been kinda critically panned too and commercially not super successful. So, this is nice to see that she's trying to attach herself to something that, she can be kind of a standout actor for. I don't expect her to be per se, like, an alien or anything. I think this should be Amy Adams as Amy Adams to get to let her stretch out a bit more. Aaron Piere, I think he's gonna have some fun stuff for sure, but I can see this being, everybody just jumping on the Rebel Ridge hype and saying like, "Okay, let's grab this young new actor, this young striking face, and give them a nice supporting role." But I think Amy Adams could really flesh out something here. The thing that's getting me more excited more than anything else, more than Mia Goth and Matt Smith, is actually Simon Bird. That's mostly because I've watched In-Betweeners back in the day, and that's like one of like the most invaluable British comedy sitcoms out there. He plays like a very stuck-up comedic roles quite often, like the smart, oh, it's too smart for his own good roles. So I'd love to see him as like a droid. I'd love to see him as an alien. I think that's definitely a role that can be fit there. But overall, I think this is a strong cast. You are throwing some big names without a doubt, but at this point, with the gap that's been there, with like a lot of the uncertainty around the brand on the theatrical stage, a couple of big names wouldn't hurt here, especially in an era that's gonna be after episode 9 that a lot of people don't necessarily have the biggest interest for, but if you can start getting a lot of these, like, standalone spin-offs, really flesh out the post-sequel era, make it part of a grander sequel era that people are like, "Hey, I like this character, I like this character, I also love Rey, I like Finn and Poe," and they can
Mhm.
cameo, tie into stuff here. It's only for the best of the brand, and I'm excited for this. I like the name. I'm hoping we get to see some really awesome, like, dynamic fighting and some visually impressive stuff. Definitely some new ship design for sure. Like, already that land speeder inspires hope for me because it looks like something that is very original trilogy, but updated 30 years. There's some smoothness to it while still being very utilitarian functional, and that's really all we need. We don't need the things to be the same exact designs like it does feel like a lot of times in, the sequel era, especially with the First Order. You can work that out however you wanna do it in the lore and the canon, but making this feel like a new era, it has to be like the prequel trilogy where this is a big galaxy. There's gonna be millions of manufacturers. There's gonna be incredible ship designs and ideas and innovation, just like this franchise has always had. Even when we don't feel like the sequels did enough, that doesn't mean that the sequel era has to be fully defined by something that is very much us trying to get back to that original trilogy feel and vibe. Now that we're past that point, now that we're starting fresh again, I like everything that I'm seeing here. They're taking some big gambles, and I think one of the bigger things that didn't come out on the news was the cinematographer is quite
Mm.
renowned. I forget their name, but Shawn Levy's not writing it. That's also another strong sign. Like it just seems like they're just trying to keep him to his direction, which is kind of what he does on Stranger Things, and he's had some of the highest rated episodes of that show. So very excited by all of this.
Yeah, the DP is Claudio Miranda, who did Top Gun Maverick, but also won an Oscar for Life of Pi. So it
Yeah.
is a pretty stacked production all the way around. I mean, like you said, this is truly their first theatrical Star Wars movie. Yes, Mandalorian Grogu's coming out, and I hope it's great. And I think if it is great, that's a movie that could have good word of mouth, good legs. And they are hoping it's starting, a new cinematic universe kind of for them, but this is their first original project since The Rise of Skywalker in theatrical film, and truly their first original Star Wars movie like at all. Like I know I said a few weeks ago, like this is their biggest risk they've ever taken, because Rogue One, they put the Death Star in it, they had Vader in the marketing, they had Tarkin in the film, they had a lot of stuff people were familiar with. This not only is going in a time period that's very controversial right now, but it's taking actors that have never been in Star Wars, brand new characters. Everything is new in this. And I think it's a big swing. And so you want to see them have at least a production that's this seemingly smooth. Like everything is going well right now. The movie hasn't yet started like fully, getting into the groove of shooting. So there's still time for things to go wrong. But it seems like just in general, everything from Shawn Levy's side to the acting and the group of actors, everything just seems to be on the same page with Kathleen Kennedy and the higher ups at Disney, and just everything seems to be running smoothly. And that's what you want to see, because theatrical Star Wars, kind of the downfall of it between Solo and then Rise of Skywalker was just the constant kind of disorganization that was around those films, between Rise of Skywalker shifting dates and having to, figure that out with a brand new director and new writers in like 2 years and get the movie made and come out fast, to Solo reshooting basically the whole thing, which we talked about last episode on here when Ron Howard talked about it. So it's just nice to see a Star Wars film run this smoothly. And then on top of that, Mandalorian Grogu ran really smoothly. So it just seems like right now, theatrical Star Wars is at least kind of at least making projects and getting them out and like getting them going, which is really nice to see after our string of announcements and things never happening. So that's really great. Yeah, as for the cast, I'm excited about this cast. I don't know much about Aaron Piere as of now, but because he's playing John Stewart, I already know I'm gonna like him. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he does next year in Lanterns, and then being really hyped coming into Starfighter. And then Amy Adams is somebody I've always respected and think she's really been great in everything. It is kind of She has kind of had an interesting career, because I know I said on the rundown at the top, I was like, I haven't seen her in much, and then you were talking about how you haven't seen her in much either, and I looked at her IMDb just to make sure I haven't missed anything, and she's only released two movies since 2021. It's crazy. And she was used to be in everything, and basically it feels like from the first time I had heard of her, like I said on the top, was Enchanted. And that's a really good movie, and that's a fun movie. And she's always been kind of in that vibe. But then it seemed like about 20, I want to say like 2011, I believe, was The Fighter. And then that kind of shifted her career. She took into a little bit more dramatic role. And it felt like in the 2010s, almost every year she was nominated for an Oscar for something. And really it was Hillbilly Elegy was like the last thing that you heard critical acclaim about a performance for her. And that was an SGA or a SAG nomination. Um, So she's always great. She just hasn't had that many projects that's come out. So it feels like we haven't heard from her much lately, but I'm hoping that this is another thing that can really, make her maybe a mainstay in the Star Wars galaxy, depending on what role she's playing. Be really interesting if she was playing a villain. I don't think she is because she's never had that. She's always been that kind of hero character, like nice person in a lot of things. So it'd be interesting to see what role she plays. Maybe a similar type of role to like the Sigourney Weaver, maybe New Republic esque, maybe connected. That's the connection to the rest of the Star Wars galaxy, because I think adding her as the last name in the cast indicates she might have a solid role, but maybe not somebody in the forefront of the film like the rest of the cast when we get, Mia Goth and Matt Smith and all of them. So I'm excited for the cast. I'm excited for this project. Again, it's something on paper that doesn't necessarily get me and a lot of you in the comments I'm seeing too, just like, go, oh, yes, I got to see that day one. But it's just always good being people who follow Star Wars, all year round and seeing how many projects have just not happened, or at least when they happen, it feels like you hear about a bunch of problems behind the scenes. It just seems great to have two consecutive projects, especially films, seem to have basically no behind the scenes drama whatsoever and just get started, get in production, get out. So here's hoping that 2027 marks the beginning of like original Star Wars movies, because this was always kind of the hope, I think, and dream for a lot of us when they announced the Star Wars story idea, was to have things that felt different but felt Star Wars, and we've started to kind of see that with TV with something like Andor, with things like Mandalorian and Ahsoka, and like Ahsoka's more of your classic Filoni Rebels, Clone Wars, Star Wars, but then Mandalorian's more Western, and Boba Fett is really different, and then Andor is this whole prestige drama. This could be the start of us finally getting that on film. Yes, I think the story on paper still feels very classically Star Wars, but at least it's something different with new characters. And so, yeah, I think it's one of those things I won't be that like that over the moon excited until I start to see trailers, till it starts to get close to the film coming out. But it's just nice to hear that this project seems like a promising one. But what do you guys think about Starfighter? Let us know in the comments. We have a couple of questions about Starfighter so far. First one's Brandon Tran, who says, "Do you think Starfighter might be a successful Star Wars movie because Shawn Levy is a good director?" Well, I think that's obviously a big first step, but Star Wars has hired really good talent on all their films, at least people who were kind of at the forefront of their projects when they hired them, like a J.J. Abrams originally was, with Ryan Johnson killing it. Even Ron Howard, even as a replacement for Lord and Miller, both sets of filmmakers were really promising. And now you've got Jon Favreau and Shawn Levy. I think the talent behind the camera is fantastic, but we've seen Star Wars still make questionable projects with good behind the screens talent. I think what's making me think this will be a successful Star Wars movie, at least from a critical standpoint, maybe a fan standpoint, is just the fact that everybody seems to be on the same page. They seem to really like the script. This thing has come together pretty fast. If I'm not mistaken, like Shawn Levy's movie was one of the most recent we've heard about when it got leaked that this was happening about a year ago, year and a half ago. It was one of the most recent ones we heard about. And then all of a sudden, it's the big movie of Star Wars Celebration 2025. So this thing's just had a really natural cycle, which is what makes me excited for it. So yes, Brandon, I think it has at least all the behind the scenes features of something that the studio should be confident in, and that we should be confident in as, fans looking forward to it. Do I think it will be super successful box office wise? I think that depends on a couple things. One, it depends on how good Mandalorian and Grogu is. If Mandalorian and Grogu is really good to great, then I think Starfighter will be, a pretty big success. Will it be $1 billion? Probably not. But I think also the marketing. It's like some of these movies in today's world, right? They seem like home runs on paper, or they seem like something that won't be that big on paper. But something gets into social media. I mean, Ryan Gosling was just a part of one of the last big, huge social media movements for a film with Barbie. Does that type of thing happen with Starfighter? I don't think it can to that full extent, but does some type of social media movement happen around the cast and the talent and everything around this? I think those two things will determine box office, really more so the first one. but I could see this movie at least breaking even, and I think it's going to be a pretty good movie. Now, feel the same way about this as Mandalorian and Grogu. I don't think this is going to be, instantly a top 5 Star Wars movie for me, top 4 Star Wars movie for me, but I think it's safe to assume that this will be good and that this could be an enjoyable time at theaters. And as I've said a lot over the last year, we can have these enjoyable times at the theaters. They don't have to be game-changing Star Wars movies every time they come out. As long as like 1 in every 5 is really truly great, 4 of them can just be pretty good and fun. But we need to start getting to where everything's at least pretty good and not to where 2 of them are really bad, one's mediocre, one's okay, and one's great, which is kind of where we've been with Star Wars streaming recently and really since like 2018. If 2017, if you want to include Last Jedi, the divisiveness around the fact that everything everything. So we will see ultimately what comes out of Starfighter, but I'm fairly confident in this project.
Yeah, it's a tough question because again, Sean Levy's not someone that inspires the same way as 2015 onwards. We're looking for these kind of big names and people who have this huge amount of hype behind them. And I don't know, he had Deadpool and Wolverine. Don't get me wrong. That is why his name is now like back again in like the forefront. And I always bring up Stranger Things because I've been more impressed by the work there. And he's kind of just sticking to directing there. Yes, he's a producer on it. Yes, he has some story writing credits there. But for the most part, you just leave him to be a director. And he's had some of the best action direction. He's really brought a lot of these teenage actors and their performances. So that stuff really does inspire me, right? But compared to the names that have been signed on, the people who have been like, almost scouted as like the next visionaries, the next auteurs of this modern Hollywood era, I mean, it's always been like, a, a bit of a gamble no matter what, because Kathleen Kennedy, even if I have criticisms for how she's run Lucasfilm, I think the biggest challenge for her has always been like, let's recruit the next generation of auteur filmmakers, but in a way of like you kind of almost have to mold them through the Disney, through the Lucasfilm branch. And what was so special about Spielberg, about George Lucas, was that they were a reaction to Hollywood. They were a reaction to everything that had happened with the studio system and its collapse. They were the new Hollywood. They were the ones who ushered in the blockbuster era. So now asking them to be those same sort of visionaries to kind of break the rules, to make some things new, but also still fit into that blockbuster mindset and all that. Like that's hard. That's tough. That's difficult. So I think when it was first, propped up, you had characters like J.J. Abrams, like characters like Ryan Johnson, people who seemed to almost fit those molds and could maybe break out from there. But it was uneven. I think a lot of that at the end of the day comes to the sequels not having a story group behind it for like an overarching plot line that makes sense, right? Instead of feeling like three separate films that are loosely linked together, or at least two linked together, and one kind of retconning a lot of stuff. So that was always a challenge there. But I don't think anybody ever really calls out the direction of those 3 films, right? I think we've always seen some really great stuff out of all 3 of them. I think there's some really great stuff. It's more like the writing. It's more like, why are we choosing to have these no zero story gaps like between 7 and 8? Like that's been a tradition of Star Wars. And why are we now jumping only 1 year ahead between 8 and 9? Like why Palpatine back? It's always been a little bit more on the writing side, I would say, than really the direction side. I think the direction side's been more of a criticism when we go more towards the streaming era shows, where there's some shows that, even if they are set in the Mandoverse, wildly different between episodes. Like what I think Book of Boba Fett's a great example of that, right? You can have that excellent episode 2, and then you just had to have some really weird episodes that, not just because of the storytelling, writing being all spaced out, being all flashback based, but Rodriguez was just not the guy. He cut stuff to the bone, like the choices that he made, like doesn't matter how well it was shot. He was choosing to be in the editing room and kind of cut it down like his pulpier films like Spy Kids, and that just doesn't work for a character that has so much history, has so much backstory, and has such a darker tone in general than what he ended up going with, right? So stuff like that, I think, is a little bit more where the directing has kind of failed Star Wars in recent times. But I don't think Levi has any of those issues. It's always been more of a criticism of his cinematography and having rather simple scripts. We know he's not the writer. Right? He might have come up with the story outline, but he's not the writer. We have the cinematographer for Top Gun Maverick, excellent tier, right? Someone who has such great visual dynamism already. That's gonna be really great because Star Wars has always had starfighters and dogfighting. That's always been the bread and butter since the first film. So now I have a lot more confidence in a film being called Starfighter actually having some great stuff with starfighters, right? So that always inspires a lot of confidence for me. But getting people's butts in their seats to have a great fun time in theaters, yeah, Sean Levy's never really failed at that. Like, I think that's what's been nice to hear about it. I think he spent a lot of time honing his craft. Now that he's letting other people handle some other things that he's not the best at himself, or, is pushing to have, or at least Lucasfilm is pushing for him to have, like, the best available talent around him. Yeah, I think things will be pretty great here. I am pretty confident in that. I'm not expecting a billion-dollar film, honestly. I don't think that's something that's necessarily a reflection of Levy either. I think it's just the fact that now in a post-COVID world, post-labor strike, post-writer strike, we're still recovering. We're still recovering from COVID. We're recovering from everything still. This industry will not be the same as it was just a mere 6, 7 years ago. And in that same way, now maybe Lucasfilm, Kathleen, they're all looking at it as like, let's stop trying to bring these auteur filmmakers. Let's just bring filmmakers that are efficient, are good at their jobs, know how to balance their budgets, know how to produce well and bring good talent around them. And now we might have to focus a little bit more on having the talent there instead of unknowns, like is the bread and butter of every Lucasfilm project, but maybe that's for the best here so that we have a guaranteed floor, right? You have to be a little bit pragmatic, especially with this being the first real test in theaters. Again, Mandalorian Grogu, as much as I'm excited for it, it's like just season 4 condensed. That's how it's gonna feel like. This is like a whole new story in an era that is completely untouched, but still has a lot of like the weight and the baggage of everything from episode 9 as its most recent thing. So I think they're making a lot of smart moves here. I think it'll be successful. I can't say anything about numbers, but like Liam said, if Mandalorian Grogu does well and is critically received and makes maybe like somewhere between 600 and 800, I think this could be more in the upper park, like of like a 700, 800, maybe touching 900. And if it gets to a billion, great. But if it does, I think it'll be more because everyone's downloaded another Ryan Gosling personality for like another 2 months here, just like they do with Fall Guy, like they do with Barbie and all that with Nice Guys. Like he is that type of actor that can get teens and men into back in the movie theaters. But at the end of the day, it's not like you're losing your male audience like some people have been reporting Disney's fears about it. I think it's just the fact that we haven't had great storytelling from Marvel and it's been up and down for them. And despite how many movies it put out, I don't think Star Wars has truly had that much of a problem because we just don't have the movies yet. Even the worst movies still made $1 billion. So I'm not super worried about the audience not showing up, but I think all the choices made but Levy as a centerpiece of this has been pretty smart, and I think will result in a successful movie.
Yeah, I think they should be concerned about the audience not showing up, but I don't think it'll be a bomb. I think regardless, it'll get close to making its money back if it doesn't make it all back. But I think we do live in a world now to where big budget, big name movies aren't guaranteed hits. I mean, they're not even guaranteed to be at least a break even thing anymore, and part of it is the budgets. Um, Budgets have been really high, and we'll see if Starfighter kind of in this new wave of Disney budgeting rides that 120 to 200 but $1 million budget, or it's a 200 million plus dollar budget like we've seen with the other sequel films, and like with Rogue One, and like Solo had like over $300 million budget because they shot it twice. So when you compare it to a bunch of those things, you have to take all those things into account, right? So I think 500 million, you're pretty happy with this. Like Star Wars, I think they should approach their next few projects, Mandalorian Grogu, Starfighter, the same way DC's approached Superman. It's just like, we need it to break even If it makes a little bit more than break even, we're happy. But the number one thing we need is critical success. And the number two thing we need is, well, probably the number two thing is critical success. Number one thing is overwhelming fan appeal. Like people have to like this movie and they have to like Mandalorian and Grogu. Otherwise, the Star Wars rebuild hasn't really happened. So they're in the rebuilding phase of like reclaiming their image. If they can't reclaim their image through these films, then there's not much to talk about in terms of box office. It can make $1 billion, but if people hate it, uh, it's not gonna really do anything for them. I mean, they'll be happy they made money, but that's about it. Because we saw with the sequels, 4 of the 5 Star Wars movies so far under Disney have all made $1 billion plus. But really, and 3 of the 5 were huge critical successes with Force Awakens, Rogue One, and Last Jedi. Solo was kind of mixed critical, and Rise of Skywalker was poorly received critically. But with the fans, really only one and a half were super well received. I would say 2 on release. I think nowadays majority of the fans have come around to Solo at least being solid. A lot of people are like that movie. Force Awakens, I think the majority of people still like the Force Awakens, even if the louder voices tell you they don't. I think if you asked 100 people on the street, I think most of the people would say they liked Force Awakens. It's really The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker that have been the ones that you might get a different answer every person you ask about those movies. And so they have to reclaim the image and the feel around Star Wars, and hopefully these movies at least start to do that. You can't hope for massive successes box office wise right away. They have to just hope that we get something solid and that people are on board and critics are on board, because there was an obvious big divide between critics and fans in the previous 5 movies that Disney has released. So we shall see where they go with that. Critical Thinker has the last word here on Starfighter, where he says, what do you guys hope to see out of Starfighter? What do you want the filmmakers to focus on? Well, again, number one, make a good movie. But number two, I think something that's uniquely standalone. Like I would like to see something standalone. I would like to see some layers because of the specific time period they have chosen for this film. I'd love to see some elements, some Easter eggs, some layers brought to the galaxy post Rise of Skywalker. I want to know maybe what is the galaxy like? How are they rebuilding from this latest war? How has it affected certain planets, especially the planets I'm assuming we'll see in this type of movie? Those planets that are a little bit more lawless already. How has the power vacuum, the fact that not only did we just lose a planet of prominence like we did during the Galactic Civil War, but we lost an entire system that was the whole sole government of the galaxy at the time. What does that do for the power vacuum, in the galaxy? We don't need to get, too much into politics in this type of movie because it is Starfighter. It's, assuming, going to be a high flying space adventure, but I would like to at least, hear some people reference in the background. Oh, well, since Hosnian Prime, this area has been really lawless, and they haven't been able to really get control. And what's the resistance turned into now? Are they the new Republic? Are they the new Republic 2.0? What are they now? And who has a hold on the galaxy? Or is it just a completely lawless land as Rey works to rebuild the Jedi, as the remnants of the resistant works to find some footing in the galaxy? Are there different governments across all these different sectors? I think some things like that, you don't have to get into the true lore and politics of Star Wars to, reference those, but you could at least have a character say some throwaway lines that kind of indicate what the rest of the galaxy is like. So I'd like to mainly see that in terms of Star Wars lore. But as for the film itself, I kind of want it to be a standalone thing. I would love it to just have its own life, have its own feel, its own fun, but feel, wholly Star Wars, but feel unique. And I think it could set that template for where we go in the future. I know, there are a lot of people out there who feel like if you aren't making original trilogy style, prequel style Star Wars, George Lucas style Star Wars, you're not making Star Wars. And then you'll have those people who are Andor detractors who say that type of stuff. But ultimately, I mean, to me, Star Wars, yes, that is the core of Star Wars, and that will always feel the most Star Wars. But you can make great Star Wars projects like Andor and have their own feel, right? So if this starts discovering a new feel based in the myths of George Lucas, I think that would be wonderful. So I'm just hoping to get something that has an identity and really be the first Star Wars film that has a true identity that's not, you know, within the George Lucas version of Star Wars and kind of starts to morph and evolve into what the actual future of Disney canon Star Wars is going to look like. And I think hopefully by the end of Starfighter, we kind of have an idea for what they're planning on doing with the future of this franchise moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of build off of that, like you're saying, I think it should be a lot of show, don't tell, right? Like, I don't want it to be weighed down with like, okay, now we have to like explain everything about the galaxy and everything that happened in the sequels and what's changed. Like, you don't have to. I mean, it'll be very interesting to even see the starting point of this sort of chase and run away from the villains. It seems like the way it's been reported, Gosling is, I think, the uncle, this is his nephew, maybe Amy Adams is the mother or something, and this is, like, a good way to, have a really cool ship and fly around and visit some stuff that we see in sequels, some prequels, some original trilogy, some obviously new planets and every, new locale. Because what is a Star Wars show if you're not or movie if you're not gonna have new things in it, right? So, I think we'll be able to see some cool things like that. I think we'll be able to see them run into the resistance forces or whatever they're morphed into. Maybe we'll see some solar systems that have become their own, like, corporate states, like maybe the Corellians, like in the EU, are kind of doing their own thing or something. You can see some First Order versus Final Order face-offs and them just like flying through that, and them maybe like being chased by all of them at once because at the end of the day they're still evil on both sides or something like that. It'll be cool to just kinda see stuff like that kinda pop up. I'd love to see remnants of the New Republic Navy and see if they can kinda be like escorts or like, try to give them a little bit of help before they're gunned down, cause show that they're still, like, working their way back to full-fledged form. They're no longer, you know, pretending that they can be a defense force. They actually have to build up to whatever is now still under the New Republic, right? So, stuff like that, I think will be really fascinating to see, and I think that's where ship designs, that's where, just big scale stuff can be explored. Obviously, there will be things on land. I think there will be stuff that will definitely take place, but I would love for this film to be a little bit more cosmic, a little bit more of them just going through some really insane, visually stunning places. We've seen that so much in animation. We see a little bit of that in episode 9, with the red haze and all that. Like, there is a lot of potential for, like, exploring a little bit more of that, but it's really just been animation that's really done the wildest things and with, like, solar phenomena and all that. And I'd love for this kid and his uncle to, like, run into all this stuff and along with all these other forces. Like, this should be like, us entering the galaxy as a character. Like, this is a cool aspect of Star Wars that never really gets its love and due in the movies because everything is so much more about, okay, the good guys are fighting back against the bad guys defeat them. Okay, repeat, rinse, right? So that's going to happen anyways. But if you get to fly around the galaxy, see some beautiful, stunning things, maybe honestly, at that level of like what we saw with Kessel and the Kessel Run in Solo, I think that's probably the most dynamic that we've seen of like any real live action Star Wars like space phenomena. If you can kind of combine that stuff, show us the galaxy and how they're interacting with the different factions that have come up or the different factions that are trying to restabilize. Yeah, you're gonna have some people throwing some lines here and there, but it'll be a nice way of just seeing where it is. And yeah, if this is just a one-off, I wouldn't mind it, like you're saying. Oops, I think we lost Liam here. Sorry, guys. Internet in my area has not been the best. But like I was saying, it'll just be nice for them to, possibly fold in Gosling into other movies and stuff where, he can be a breakout character, but he doesn't have to have a Starfighter too and all that. Like, if
Mhm.
it's the angle of, like, having him be like a canon version of Corran Horn or something, and he also has the Force, easy lead up to New Jedi Order and having him be part of the Academy. If he's just a regular dude, right, you could see him in whatever New Republic Navy or some other Force. You could see stuff like that without him having to necessarily do Starfighter too, right? So, let this kinda be its own thing. I think that was definitely a criticism that I've grown to understand and appreciate a little bit more about The Mandalorian from season 1 beloved love viewers. They're the ones that are always saying, like, "This shoulda just stayed a Western. This shouldn't have been super interconnected to everything." I don't personally fully agree with that. I think it's become a little overconnected to everything now, but at one point, I think season 2 was the right balance of it all. Now that it's
Yeah.
becoming a cinematic universe, don't necessarily have to do that again here, like, don't try to overdo it, and I think it'll be fine. I think that's just the best way of looking at it, just make a good film that gives us a state of the galaxy, shows off the galaxy as a whole visually and factions, have a little bit of dialogue here and there, lead us into sequel characters like Rey, possibly, with the new Jedi Order and the Force connections that are being hinted about here. And then, you'll see what works out from this film and you can make a quasi sequel. Making direct sequels to this, I'm not even sure is something I want to see immediately. I just kind of want to see them like almost make the sequel era an era with this film by simply just exploring the galaxy. And if that happens to be like almost like that hidden secondary plot of this film, I'll be pretty happy with that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, I think Star Wars, a lot of times when it's worked its best in starting eras is when it doesn't worry about what's coming next, right? So when it can be fully standalone, doesn't mean you can't make more, but A New Hope has a complete beginning, middle, and end because they never knew if they were going to make more. I think, and we've talked about on this channel a lot in the past too, like I think the ideal way to work on these projects is to have ideas for sequels, get them written down, get them going. You don't have to have a full script, but like get things organized and together, but only plan for one movie. But just kind of if it requires Disney paying them a little bit more, just kind of work ahead on what possibly could be your future. And then if it's a massive hit, then you're ready to go because the worst trend we see in Hollywood, and I understand it now, because of the finances, because of how crazy unpredictable everything is these days. But one of the worst trends to me in Hollywood has been the fact that they hedge their bets on everything. Every season of TV, every new movie that comes out, they wait to see how it does before starting anything on a sequel. And you used to see movies, granted, there were many bad ones, but you used to see a lot of movies made with already sequel plans in mind, especially for a franchise like Star Wars, especially with the franchises like Marvel or DC, especially for, TV shows. You expected a hint towards a season two. Nowadays, something like Ahsoka season 2, we're gonna get it 3 years after season 1. Man, I mean, Andor was, one of the anomalies, but we still got it 3 years after season 1, and it was one of the anomalies that still took off because it was so good. But a lot of these shows, if they're a 7 out of 10 show, they might be popular 1 year and then takes 2, 3 years to get season 2, and now nobody cares because it was a good show. It was fun to watch at the time, but it hasn't stuck with anybody. Nobody's rewatching it all the time, I feel that way with films, and I think Starfighter is going to be one of those that kind of falls in that category. It might not be the next great Star Wars movie, but if it's something that's pretty good and people like it, if they're not already kind of working ahead on a sequel, like seemingly James Gunn has kind of been doing with Superman, right? They said they were waiting to see how that did before they really made plans for Superman 2. But then within a month of the movie coming out, he had already announced he's starting to write Superman 2, right? And so it means they had ideas flowing. It means they had things worked out that yes, they could cancel them if they never made the movie or if the movie didn't do well. But if it does do well, if it does what they hope, then they're ready to fast track and start without rushing the story, without rushing everything to either fit a timeline or to, wait too long to where it's irrelevant. and the fan interest is not there. And if Star Wars gets going the way they want to, where they're releasing a movie a year or at least one movie every 18 months, one movie every 2 years, then you're going to be competing with yourself on what's popular and what's not. Hopefully each Star Wars movie maintains the brand loyalty and maintains the brand success. But if Starfighter comes out and then a sequel for it doesn't come out for 4 or 5 years, and in between you've had three other different types of Star Wars movies that people like more, then by the time you get Starfighter 2 out, yeah, maybe it might make a little bit more because Star Wars is popular again, but it's not going to be the huge hit that it would have been had it come out 2 years within the first one coming out. So we'll see what they plan on doing. They keep saying standalone adventure, so I think they are taking that approach of like, let's make the standalone, but everybody knows that if you make a lot of money, you're coming back for another one. Last thing on Starfighter, and then we got to move on to our second topic here, and then to take your guys' questions more completely. But Starman 170 says at the bottom that a YouTuber named Jar Jar Jargon's theory that the character or made a video theorizing that the character Amy Adams could be playing is Flynn Gray's mother, and that mother is Mara Jade, and the kid is Luke Skywalker's kid. I'm assuming his name wouldn't be Ben in canon. And Starman says, I agree with him that this could be what they're trying to do, and also that it's a rather good fit. I want Mara Jade back as much as anybody. I made a video almost 3 years ago now, maybe 2.5 years ago, about all the ways Mara Jade could come back in Star Wars canon. And this was one of the ways I theorized it, not specifically Amy Adams, but the idea of like making them leave from the main events after the Kylo, destruction of the temple because he's hunting down Jedi and Force sensitives, and maybe Luke hides them. The other way I could see it, I theorized it was that they get killed within that, either by Ben Solo and Kylo Ren, or by proxy of something Ben accidentally did prior to that, which continues his downfall. So I'd love to see Mara back. Amy Adams would be somebody who would be great as Mara because one, she's a redhead, which is always great because Mara is a redheaded character. Two, she's about the right age, to play somebody who could be in a relationship with a 50-year-old Luke, that's kind of about the age he's supposed to be around the sequels. So I think that could all work really well. Do I see that being in Starfighter? Not really. Again, I'll go back to the word standalone. I just don't think they are planning on setting up any galactic changing events within this. Now, you could be kind of right, Sonic, and maybe the idea of standalone is this is Ryan Gosling's one movie. He might be a fan favorite character who comes back for whatever the Avengers is of this post Rise of Skywalker series. And he'll come back and appear in a few things here and there, but he's not wanting to be the Iron Man of this cinematic universe. He's wanting to be somebody who's comes back for exciting scenes. It's a fun character, but not somebody that you expect to see in everything. But maybe the character that Flynn is playing is somebody who's supposed to continue and be in a bunch of things. Maybe Amy Adams is supposed to continue and be in a bunch of things. I don't necessarily buy that from Amy Adams just because she's never really attached herself to franchises, but maybe she is now. She hasn't been doing much, lately. Who knows? I just think it's a big character to play, an important character who you'd want to be involved in a lot of different stuff, and somebody that doesn't necessarily quite make sense for this project. That where if you said Amy Adams was going to be in Luke or Rey's new Jedi Order movie or anything to do with the Force specifically, I could say, okay, yeah, I could see that theory. I don't know if I still don't know if I'd buy it until I was in the theater seeing it for myself. But I could buy it a little bit more than this specific project that seems so isolated, seems so insular, and just seems like it has been able to attract these big name actors because it's supposed to be isolated and a solo thing. Um, so I don't personally buy it that she's going to be Mara in this specific film, but I think she would make a great Mara, and I think she could absolutely do it. And if they were to ever bring Mara back, I would be thrilled.
Uh, I don't know. Like I'm in agreement here, Liam. I think I'd want Mara back. I want her to be canonized. I don't think we really necessarily need him to be. I don't I think my biggest issue with this is, again, it's standalone, and I want something that truly means standalone in Star Wars again. That's always been the issue that I've had with Star Wars in general, is that everything has to be super connected. I'm not saying that you can't have characters reappear and all that, but let's let these new characters kinda stand on their own for a bit. Even if they're not massive, huge successes, it'd be great to do that. Like Rogue One, you can at least understand, like, this is their first real gamble at like, a new story that's not connected to Skywalker Saga. Okay, I can understand that you wanna connect to the Death Star, you get to still have a whole new cast of characters, and you wipe them out. That's a big gamble in itself, I can appreciate that. Solo Star Wars story, if they had gone for a proper, like, almost like adaptation of the AC Crispin style novels instead of just, "Here's how he got his gun, here's how he's got his ship," right? If they actually did something that was unique about him and that isn't really touched upon, but has shaped him, that would've been awesome, but we didn't get that, right? And this is our first real chance of them doing a Star Wars story again as a concept and more properly. Let it happen here. Post episode 9, it is a fresh slate. Like, I get the timeline of it. I don't necessarily from looking the Flynn Gray image, think that he, like, gives me 14-year-old vibes. He looks a little small, but it could also just be how he's seated. But, I mean, kids also grow up super fast. Maybe they're working around that, anticipating that he has a growth spurt or something while they're producing this, right? Those are all things to be considered for sure. But I'm kinda of the agreement. If you have Mara, right, no matter what, it's gonna have to be a tragedy like it is in canon or sorry, in Legends. In Legends, it didn't have to be, you're right? The decision to kill Mara off in Legacy of the Force was not done by Timothy Zahn, right? And, I would say at that point, she hadn't really been as huge of a character, but still, she was family, she was important, right? She's still part of the Skywalker Solo clan. Here in this case, even if she doesn't necessarily get the 30 something years that we have in Legends, you can still condense the best parts of her story. I think one thing that always throws me off personally, and I've always harped on it in our streams and on our videos, Mara's first 10 years of like knowing Luke are not a lot, right? She kind of goes in and out. She kind of does her own thing. Like, the end of the Heir to the Empire trilogy, she gets the blade of, Anakin Skywalker. She gets Luke's old lightsaber, but the only first visual depiction that we got, right, in her DLC pack for, I believe it was Dark Forces 2, right, Jedi Knight? Yeah,
Mhm.
for that one, she has a purple lightsaber, right? She's been very inconsistent her first 10 years, so you could say a lot of her story doesn't really start until, beside if we're gonna exclude a lot of the stuff in Heir to the Empire, kind of like the Corellian trilogy, that's kinda when she first really starts appearing again, and then we get to the Hand of Thrawn duology. She doesn't have a huge amount of stuff going on in the Bantam era. It's really afterwards where she becomes a little bit more crucial and essential. Now, what all you gotta do here, honestly, is just you just kinda build out her character to be focused, to be big, right? And be important from the start of it. It's all happening here. So I think if you do that 15, 20 years, you get the majority of the time that Luke Skywalker's Academy is happening. You could still let her filter in and out. Sweet, awesome. Amy Adams would not be a bad, Mara Jade. Don't get me wrong. We don't have to work with Mark Hamill current day look because the sequels are over 10 years ago now at this point. You could kind of line it up with Amy Adams having grown older and kind of set in time for Luke there. Not bad, right? But do I really need it? No, I don't want this to be individual. The whole point of the movie being titled The Force Awakens is that the Force is not simply awakening in Rey, and it's not simply awakening in Kylo, it's awakening in everybody, right? Finn has the Force kick in with him, right? There's implication that Janna and all these other First Order stormtroopers that deserted at least were guided by the Force, if not themselves being slightly Force sensitive, right? There's a whole potential of everything kind of exploding. I like that concept to kind of be continued here. Like it'd be very interesting to me in my mind if, unlike how Legends, where Luke had like so many different Jedi kind of join up his academy and he interacted with so many people throughout the Bantam eras into the Del Rey era. It'd be almost interesting if like there was just not that many. Like it was like hard to find a lot of Force sensitives for a while before he could really get a base going. And then seeing post sequels, everything is actually exploding. Everything there was something that changed in the Force that actually caused random people and their families to now kind of almost have to deal with like a Legend of Korra season 3 storyline where like, oh, all of a sudden there's all these airbenders because the spirits have kind of rechanged the world. I love something to kind of happen like that here, so that way Amy Adams, Gosling, Flynn, right? They get to be new characters. It's too much of this like feeling of like, yeah, we have to stick to what worked in Legends and kind of like adapting as much of that possible seems to almost permeate in a lot of stuff that happens in between episode 6 and 7. And I can understand that. But post 9, I think it should be as clean as possible. That's just me, you know. If it happens to be Mara Jade and if the story is great, cool. But then my biggest issue there is like, well, why are we almost immediately retconning out that like all the Skywalkers died and Rey took on the Skywalker name and adopted it with like the approval of Luke and Leia in the distance? If immediately the next thing that we see post episode 9 is them saying like, oh, here's an actual Skywalker kid by blood. It's like now we don't have any time to develop Rey and what that Skywalker mantle means to her. Now we've got no chance of really taking time to explore Ben as a character in flashbacks and an animated show or live action TV show, and maybe possibly even having Adam Driver show up with some interesting Force tied stuff. Now we're like focused on this new Skywalker, and that just you don't want to undermine the sequels any more than they've already done themselves, in my mind. So I would personally say no. Just let's not. We don't have to love the pieces that 9 left us with, but let's at least respect them for a little bit. It might eventually happen, but not for the first film.
Yeah, I feel similarly on a couple different things. One, I'm okay with retconning a lot of stuff the Rise of Skywalker did. Like I would love it to have another Skywalker around. I just think it kind of makes no sense for the sequels, like especially if the only reason to me personally that Mara and a hypothetical Ben Skywalker would leave Luke is because he's worried about Kylo hunting down all the members of his order, Vader-esque an Order 66 situation. But then, like, why would Kylo still not be talking about it throughout the sequel trilogy? Like, oh, I gotta
Yeah.
find, this kid. He's the last hope for the Skywalkers. Like, there's things that make no sense if that were the case for the sequel trilogy. I know some people's philosophy probably will be, well, who cares? Just ignore the sequel trilogy. But I mean, you can't because it's part of the lore. So it would just make no sense from like a completionist standpoint if that were the case. So then you'd have to go with like Luke secretly had this child and secretly sent them away and then maybe faked Mara's death or something. I don't know. You'd have to do something like that. And I'd be okay with working my way around that type of thing to get a Skywalker. I know Skywalker's Academy said that kid's supposed to be 14 or speculation around 14. I also don't necessarily see that in the picture. He just looks super young. Maybe that's just how old the actor is, right? But like both from the pictures on IMDb that I'm looking at and the picture they released, he looks, I would have guessed like 12, 10. But you never know. Maybe it's just the way the picture is staged. So if it is 14, I think that does kind of work. And I think even Amy Adams as Mara works in that timeline. I mean, people forget as well with how old Ben is. Like people think of Ben with the solos, but like Ben is not born until the Yuzon Vong War, which makes like Luke is almost 50 at that point. He's like in his mid to late 40s in the Yuzon Vong War. And Mara is also like in her late 30s. So I mean, biologically it shouldn't be super possible for them to have children, but they do, and that's why they have one, but like Ben is born way after the solos. They're way older than him, all of them. And so I think it could make sense that if an older Luke, a 40 something year old Luke, met Mara, who'd probably have to age down a little bit from the sequels, but if you did the full like Rise of Kylo Ren plotline, which again is like 28 ABY, and the Yuzon Vong War ends around that time as well. I outlined that all in that video, so if anybody's interested, go ahead and check that out. It's on the channel. Um, but yeah, it's around the same time, so it all would work to do that storyline. I just don't know if Starfighter's the place I see it. But Amy Adams, I mean, I understand the speculation because she's a redheaded person for a redheaded character, and Mara. I think that is personally to me that is one of Mara's defining traits too. Just like she is striking. That's a striking part of her her like swagger and personality, and her physical appearance. And so I would love it if they kept that if they ever brought her in. But I also kind of with you, Cynic, to where like I don't mind personally. This we disagree on. Like I don't mind personally them bringing Skywalkers back in like a ham-fisted way. Again, it would always feel weird. It would always feel like a retcon. But I don't personally mind that if it means the future's better. But I just also think just this franchise in general, the more they can get away from comparing themselves to legends, the more they'll be able to find an identity of their own. Because originally it sounded great to just adapt legends, and I was all into that, and I'm still into that for the things they've decided to bring from legends into canon. And like you said too, I'm more into that in the post Return of the Jedi, pre Force Awakens time period, and also whatever they end up doing with Old Republic and stuff like that. But since they've already gotten rid of the Solo children, since we don't have Amara, since we don't have a Ben Skywalker, and since with those changes, we don't have a Yuzan Vong War, we don't have a second Galactic Civil War, we don't have all the post Return of the Jedi stuff outside of an adaptation of the Thrawn trilogy we're kind of getting. Then it would hypothetically be better to just not try to continue to compare yourself to legends. Like you can I've said, take legends ideas like the Yuzan Vong War and do something big and different like that. It doesn't have to be the Yuzan Vong, but it can be a big, epic, extra galactic war with non-force users, creating this whole new vibe, making it feel different without copying legends. Because if you just do legends all the time, you're inviting comparison. And I think originally their idea was to do that, but try to make it more cohesive. And then they started to realize, uh-oh, now when we change things, people are mad. So now what do? We kind of got to do our own thing. And then everybody's like, well, now there's a comparable, right? If they were just two completely distinctly different timelines, hypothetically, it would have been a little bit better because you'd have one that it could have been its own thing. And I mean, we can go off on the tangent again too about they should have kept Legends going, but in its own universe, and then canon could have been its own universe. There's all these factors, and they've made mistakes, and in hindsight, things it could work differently. But ultimately, I think now moving forward, Poe, Finn, and Rey are so completely different than Jason, Jaina, and Anakin and Ben Skywalker that you might as well just go in a new direction and not continually invite yourself to have that Legends comparison. Still, again, I'm not opposed to Luke's son appearing out of nowhere, but naming him, he won't be Ben Skywalker, but bringing
Yeah,
him
he
RJ,
can't.
making him basically Ben Skywalker 2.0, then you start to invite that comparison. And so I think they should try to avoid that as much as they possibly can, just for the sake of the fandom, because there's always, when you have something new, as much as people can push back against it, you can find ways to like new things because you can't compare them to your old things. When you have a
Right.
remake or you have a redo of something old, then you're always going between what do I like better between the two versions. And if they can avoid that, I think that's really ideal. Luke
Yeah.
Skywalker's Academy says, oh, you can have a point on that as
Yeah, I
well.
mean, and I'm on the same train. Like, I still don't hate the idea of having a Luke having a child. Don't get me wrong, but it it seems like almost like the ways that it's gonna happen in a post sequel world will maybe be something more like, oh, the world between worlds, like Ahsoka, how she survives because Ezra pulls her out. Like, it might almost have to be something like that. I don't want it to simply just be like, oh, you know, Vader didn't know about Luke because he was charred up on Mustafar, and nobody told him that. Yeah, Padme was gonna have twins, and Padme was told to be killed or dead by his own hand. Right? I don't want it to be like too much into that. I think it should be something where they can like almost like say like, yeah, not only did Luke not know, but this was almost the thing that had to happen via the Force to protect the family, protect that lineage, and that I think that's fine. I don't mind that. I just don't want it to be our first thing. I would almost like it to have the seeing Rey established with the Skywalker clan, and then, maybe you, like, end her movie with, like, Mara Jade walking up or something with her son, like, and then you're like, "Oh my god, that's a huge hook for us." Like, why is she
Mhm.
alive here? Why are we not suddenly dealing with like this whole amount of storytelling? And then if you say there's force phenomenon, if there's some crazy things that have happened that have changed, cool. That's fine by me. I do not mind that. But if you're talking about like, hey, no, like we just didn't tell Luke, it was just a way to keep everything safe and sealed up, I'm not going to be the biggest fan of that.
Well, I think kind of a compromise with that is you could say she was forced to flee Kylo and didn't know she was pregnant. I mean, you could kind of do that too. It wouldn't necessarily work for the age gap though. Like if he is 14 or in that like 10 to 14 range, this movie is supposed to be 3 years after Rise of Skywalker, right? So that's only Rise of Skywalker is 7 years after Rise of Kylo Ren. I guess it could be he could be to like 10. He could be in 10 to 12 range, and that could work. Uh, but it's hard to see a 14-year-old making that work in the timeline. But anyway, it's an interesting discussion. Thanks for bringing that up, Starman. Skywalker's Academy says exactly. Lucasfilm has been saying that they're going to mix in some of the expectations of fans from 2012. I'm not putting Mara Jade story out of the question. Mark Hamill spoke about a woman. It makes a little sense, but it's not needed. It's not great when George wouldn't sell Lucasfilm unless they kept the story within his vision. Um, and then says, no, you don't have to compare. They can be two different stories, and you two can both be happy. And yeah, that's the point. I think if you and that's what, and again, last word on this is just that people don't see Star Wars canon, Star Wars Legends as two different timelines like they see, the different Earths in a DC universe or the different Earths in a Marvel universe, because we constantly keep bringing the same story beats and same characters from one timeline and putting them into the new timeline. And yes, in a multiverse, you have both, you have the same characters doing different things in multiple timelines, but ideally the way to continue to distinguish the canon and legends are different is to say this has a completely different post Return of the Jedi look and feel to it versus the other one. And I think that's their way to double down, is to go into the future and make it different than we've seen before. It's not ideal. It's not what the 2012 fans, probably us included, would have liked them to do, but it's kind of the reality of the situation they had, and ultimately now the reality years removed from the sequels, 10 years removed from Force Awakens, and what they ultimately decided to do. But yeah, those are the thoughts on Starfighter. We went for an hour and 10 minutes almost on Starfighter, but it was an interesting discussion. Thank you guys all for those questions. We want to run down the visions topic here real quick because that is a big topic we would like to discuss. And then we're going to get to your guys' questions for the remainder of the stream. We'll go a little longer tonight just because we skipped last week. So don't worry, we still have time to get your guys' questions and comments. So keep sending those into the chat. Right now, more people are liking or watching the stream than have liked it. So make sure you like it if you're watching right now, and subscribe. We do this every single week, taking your guys' questions, comments, theories, anything you'd like to discuss, and talking about the latest Star Wars news. All right, let's talk about Visions. And this is almost a week old news, so a lot of you guys have probably heard about it or discussed it a little bit more. So we won't go fully too long on this, but Visions has been confirmed to release on October 29th. It was already announced to come out that day, but it's been confirmed again by Star Wars on their Twitter. The Visions coming out October 29th with a new poster. And in this poster, one of the most exciting things we got was the announcement that Visions season 3 is going to be our first like continuation of stories from the Vision series. We've had some comic connections in the past. We had a whole novel that tied in and was a prequel to the Duel episode, but in the actual animated form, which is what most people know of Star Wars Visions, we have yet to have any sequel episodes, and we are getting some sequel episodes this time on top of the Ninth Jedi series that is coming out next year. So we got the announcement that there are going to be 9 episodes in Star Wars Vision Season 3, with 3 of the shorts being direct continuations of episodes from Volume 1. So we have The Duel Payback, which will be a sequel to The Duel. That one is made by Anima and Kamikaze Doga. And then we have The Lost Ones, which is a sequel to The Village Bride, which to me was one of the most underrated episodes of season one. I know, most people who watched it liked it, but it just seemed like Ninth Jedi and The Duel got so much talk. I loved The Village Bride. And we're getting a sequel to that one produced by Kinema Citrus Co. Ninth Jedi, Child of Hope production. IG is making that one. And that will assumedly maybe lead us right into our Ninth Jedi show, which is coming out next year. So that's pretty exciting. As for the original stuff, we've got Yuko's Treasure by Kinema Citrus as well, the people who made The Village Bride. The Smuggler by Trigger. They were the ones that made The Twins last year in their season one, and a pretty prominent anime studio. The Bounty Hunters by Wit Studio. The Song of Four Wings by Project Studio Q. The Bird of Paradise from Polygon Pictures, and Black by David Productions. So those are our episodes and the announcements for Visions. Hopefully we get a trailer here soon. We are, leading up to the release of Visions. I mean, as Star Wars fans, and the fact that we haven't had much Star Wars news lately, I've been hoping for a trailer any week now. But I'd imagine with Disney's timeline for when they start promoting things on Disney Plus, especially something like this that's only going to be a one-day drop, I'd imagine like beginning of October, we'll probably see a trailer, maybe last week of September. I don't think it'll be really anytime soon. This was their kind of their way to get the word out, and they're going to start really promoting it as we get closer. But Sonic, you hear the sequels that are coming from Visions. You heard about all the new stuff that's coming out. You saw the poster. Which things are you most excited for with Visions Season 3?
I think for me, it's gonna always have to be the Ninth Jedi sequel. I was a big fan of Ninth Jedi, and it was so far ahead in the future that it's always kind of stuck with me as like this could be kind of canon. It doesn't have to necessarily be written off. I don't know so far, even with the announcement of like the individual Ninth Jedi series, that's not necessarily the case. I think it's gonna kind of stay in between not being quite legends, but not being quite canon like everything else has been in Visions, which, I'm fine with. I just want us to finally push forward and have a fully canon anime series that has like weight and stakes, right? So yeah, I I think it'd be fine, alright? I think that's probably just me personally pushing for that and feeling like Visions has almost overstayed itself after season 2 was a little bit lackluster once they expanded to all the global audiences. If they had kinda done more of the sequel ideas immediately and then filtered in some global studios, maybe we'd be looking at a volume 3 as like, "Oh my god, this is gonna be so much awesome." Like, now we're really excited to read and not read, to watch, like, not just these new ideas, but some threads that have continued from the very first release of all these Vision shorts. So, yeah, I mean, it's a bit unfortunate that 2 kinda almost, like, throws everything out of the window and tries to change up the formula, and it wasn't super successful, it wasn't super well marketed. So for me, it's really the sequels, right? And this will be the most interesting thing for me. I think that's the one that I'm most looking forward to. I'm hoping it'll not only honor the original Ninth Jedi, but it'll also be a nice little bridge to the TV show where if that first short isn't super connected to everything that we see, if it's more like a prototype pilot episode and this is a little bit more of like, okay, let's actually build a world and story around it and take it to another step that it can now connect into the proper Ninth Jedi series, cool for me. I would not mind that at all. I think the one that I'm more excited for is one of the original ideas, the one where it's just you're flying like stormtroopers and as they're like mentally breaking down and everything's falling apart around them. I don't know
Mhm.
which short that one. It was previewed.
It's
Um
Black, the
Black,
last one
right?
from
From
David
David
Production.
Studios, yeah. Yeah, so that one seemed super exciting for me because we've kind of had, like, a lot of these vision shorts be a little bit more focused on childic childish storytelling, just more, like, going back to the base concepts of Star Wars. I can't blame them, right? Like, there's only so much you can do in, like, 15, 20 minutes, but we live in a golden age for adult animation. Like this is a great opportunity for Star Wars to actually experiment with visions and actually do some cool new things. So, if I'll trade away, a Tatooine Rhapsody, Lopin, Ocho, or whatever that one was called, like, any day for something like this where you actually get to explore some of these concepts that, not even the books have necessarily got into, not much visual mediums, not the comics. Like, this is a great way to, like, deal with the fracturing mind of, like, a stormtrooper. I think that is insanely cool to see, and just some of the preview images, it does seem like it's gonna have some extreme dynamism with, what's going on
Mhm.
with its animation style. So that one was my, like, number 1 pick before the sequels were, like, announced for this 3 episodes from volume 1. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it still is up there. It's a close number 2. Once we actually get to see a little glimpses of each one of them, maybe it'll go back up to 1 for me, but it's really those 2 right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, how can you not be excited for Ninth Jedi? I mean, I'm excited for all 3 of the sequels. I really loved all 3 of those episodes, excuse me, from season 1. The Elder is the only one of my probably top 4 that's not getting a
Yeah,
sequel, and so I really dug the duel, and The Village Bride was probably my biggest surprise, and Ninth Jedi
that's a
lived
great
up to
one.
the hype because that one was hyped, before it even came out. But yeah, I think Black looks really good. David Production is a pretty notable studio as well. They worked on JoJo's, um, so it's pretty exciting. And then even the director who's doing Black, he didn't direct obviously, but he worked on Spirited Away and he worked on Akira, and so you have somebody who's been around for a long time and is really taking his own swing at Star Wars. It just looks super interesting. They said it's all set to the backdrop of a song with these kind of psychedelic images. Just it looks really cool. But yeah, I think all of them sound pretty interesting. I mean, compared to last time, right? We got some studios who personally I had never heard of. And then when you looked at their credits, they hadn't done super notable work. Now we're getting something like Wit Studio did the first 3 seasons of Attack on Titan. They've done Vinland Saga. These are some of the people who are at the forefront of anime right now, and they're taking on Star Wars, and that's pretty cool. And the other ones too, Polygon Pictures, they've worked on a bunch of different stuff as well. That like they did the Godzilla movies on Netflix. Personally, I didn't really love, but they've done a lot of notable stuff. So they've gotten a good group of people this time, a good group of studios. It seems to be something at least studios are interested in exploring. Star Wars is popular in Japan. It's not as big as it is here, and it's not as big as it is in the Western world. But compared to most of the Eastern Asian countries, like China, it's more popular in Japan than it is in China, and it does have a pretty big fan base. I mean, obviously, we know that from Star Wars Celebration. So, it seems like creators are looking at this as not just a way to bring Western audiences to their projects, but also a way to connect interests of the Japanese population with maybe their own studio as well and be like, hey, this is another, you know, notch on our resume of things we've done that you also enjoyed from another major franchise. So I think it looks great. I'm excited for it. Can't wait to see the next trailer. Hopefully it comes out soon. But Visions season 3, I think hopefully too, as we every release of Visions is kind of like this, moment in the fandom because it's a 1 day release, right? Hopefully this kind of continues and creates some conversation around Visions that's not normally there, not just because it's returning to anime, but because we have some things that people loved already from season 1 returning. So I think the hype should kind of come back a little bit more than you would normally get for a season 3 of something like Star Wars Visions. But what do you guys think? Let us know in the chat what your thoughts are on Star Wars Visions. Last thing before we move fully on to your guys' questions, I just wanted to mention this so you guys all knew about it. We don't have to talk about it really on the channel. But we are getting a new Audible original on October 9th for people who are subscribed to Audible. We are getting our fourth Audible original Star Wars kind of short book. It's not quite an audio drama because it's not fully cast, but it technically is because it's Audible only. It's not, you don't have any script form, but it's called The Jaws of Jakku. It is being written by Cavan Scott, who's obviously one of the more notable Star Wars canon writers. It's a short audio novel set during the 1 year period between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, and follows Rey on a new mission with Finn as they return to the dusty ship graveyard where they first met in The Force Awakens. So that is coming out. If you're subscribed to Audible, you can check that out October 9th. Ultimately, I think both of us have enjoyed the Audible originals for the most part. I think the first one they made still is my favorite. Padawan's Pride, or I think so, Padawan's Pride.
Yeah.
That was the Anakin and Obi-Wan one, which kind of came out of nowhere and ended up being really solid for a short little 3-hour audiobook. And I did enjoy the High Republic ones as well, and they were not to me quite as good, but these have an overall pretty solid quality. And the fact that they're free with your Audible membership, you don't have to pay extra on top of your membership. It's a cool, nice feature, and it's nice to see these continuing. And it must be, I mean, they've either made a contract to make, X amount, or they're popular enough with Audible fans, or they've gotten a new subscribers enough to continue to put these out. And so that's cool, as people who are always interested in reading everything, listening to everything Star Wars. I'm excited that they keep continuing with these, because frankly, it's a really nice platform to release new small scale stories that can tackle different topics that you might not normally devote an entire full adult novel to.
Yeah, I think the emphasis on small scale and, like, variety is probably the biggest selling point. Obviously, our 2 most recent ones were High Republic tie-ins, and strangely became important if you really read it from a completionist point of view. Like, now that's why we understand the Dragon resurgence in Phase 3. I guess that's a bit of a spoiler, but they're really not that important to the main plot, regardless of why they're back, right? But still, it those are still solid books, but yeah, it was Padawan's Pride, kinda tying in a little bit of, like, Racer's Revenge and kinda those vibes there from the heyday of, like, Episode 1 to Episode 2 and Jedi Quest and all that. Like, this is a day and age where those books like Jedi Apprentice, Jedi Quest just don't functionally exist, right? We've talked about it off camera. Definitely probably have talked about it on stream too, but YA books have also completely fallen off. Like, until the mid 2010s, like that late 2000s to like 2014, 2015, YA novels were huge, they were dominant, huge franchises had come out of it, getting movie adaptations and all that. If anything, it was like Star Wars, like, had a little bit with, like, the Young Jedi Knights and Junior Jedi Knights, and then kinda fell off on that with the prequels starting, and then they kinda kicked into gear with a couple of those smaller books, and then once those became successful, then they moved into YA. But yeah, I mean, it was a little too late there. It was like, "Oh, okay, like, it's all kind of fallen off now." Like, now we don't even see like, in the High Republic, besides that, like, there really hasn't been a lot of YA novels either. So, this kind of fitting in that little nice little medium between juniorish novel books and these YA books where there's still some mature themes kinda being handled, but not necessarily being big stories like YA novels sometimes can kinda deal with. This feels like a great place for that, and, Padawan's Pride, obviously is riffing off of, like, a lot of the Legends feel of Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship, but this Jaws of Jakku kind of being set between episode 8 and 9, fleshing out again that 1 year gap. The more we get away from our heroes having connections to the Allegiance comics, the better it will be as a whole. Like, I know that's still kind of useful for Resistance Reborn and stuff like that, but we're seeing just how important like other mediums can be to flesh out the sequel era and the post sequel era already. Like we're seeing the Legacy of Vader series, how well it's done for Kylo Ren, how well it's done for the world building of what his rule has been like with the First Order when he has control of the galaxy and is taking over huge parts of the galaxy while still dealing with that legacy of Vader, as the title implies. Like that stuff, fantastic. Have our heroes necessarily gotten that same sort of justice? No, not really, not at all. So even if this is not necessarily a huge thing, allowing us to have these kind of stories where you still honor Rey mostly staying put in dealing with training under Leia and not necessarily going on huge missions, but still having time to jump to some missions with Finn, with Poe that can develop their relationship, develop their dynamic by the time of episode 9. Yeah, I want more of this, and I'm glad just to see that we're entered now, like, this sort of sequel resurgence era, not just because it's 10 years almost to The Force Awakens, but because now we're finally like, "Hey, you kinda have to flesh out the era with multimedia like George Lucas did in the prequels." That's really the only way that people are gonna, like, actually fall in love with the era and not just be beholden to the movies as the end all be all, right? That's not how the prequels don't get their love and joy because of the Clone Wars. They get it because of the multimedia project, and they get it because of all the follow-ups to episode 1 leading into it and after it, right? It was just a continuous flow of it. And sure, you wanna always consider quality, don't get me wrong, but the fact that we just never really got a lot of stuff for the sequels other than the Journey 2 books and stuff was a bit of a shame. So now getting stuff like this, it might just end up being perfectly average, right? But hearing these characters kind of come back to life, exploring some old places, seeing how they've changed between the films, all that stuff is great. And I'm excited to listen to this for sure. The only downside is that it is Audible exclusives. I wish these were at least able to be, like, Audible exclusive for a little bit, and then you can, in a month or 2, pick it up on a different platform, almost like how, like, DLCs used to be for, like, Call of Duty exclusive on Xbox and Microsoft for a month, and then they come to PlayStation a month later. If you're gonna make these exclusive, make it more like a timed exclusive. Having this be purely on the Audible platform is not my favorite thing, but it's okay. I can at least say the people who wanna find this will find it, and they'll definitely listen to it and find that they're, pretty solid.
I think I could see them doing a collection one day, um, where they collect all the different scripts, in one big hardcover and release it, kind of like they've done with the short stories for High Republic and stuff that came out in Star Wars Insider. So hopefully they do that one day so that we could have them on the shelf. But yeah, this is exciting. They have not done much of anything with Ray in this time period, so it's always nice to actually get something with her, because Finn and Poe got the Resistance Reborn book, but Ray's like barely in that at all. So all you have is really her junior novel and her really bad comic book miniseries that she's a part of. And so that's kind of it. And so hopefully we get a little bit more into the training and kind of psyche of Ray in this story and continue to get a little bit more. But yeah, that's all the Star Wars news for the week. So we're going to take your guys' questions, anything you sent to the chat, first come, first serve. If you would like to send in a super chat, guarantee that you get on tonight's show. We will take your super chat immediately. You can also join our Patreon YouTube membership programs to find other perks that are right for you, including priority chat access. Make sure you check those out if you're interested. Let's start at the top here with, I believe it will be Critical Thinker since we answered the first two already. It says favorite arc of the Jeff Johns Green Lantern run. I'd pick Sinestro Corps War, and favorite and War of the Green Lanterns is also pretty underrated. Yeah, it is underrated. Sinestro Corps War, I would also agree. It's the best one. It's the best Green Lantern comic of all time, in my opinion. It's so good. Absolutely love it. And I love everything that came out of it. Just the way Johns continued to transform the Green Lantern mythology from that point. Really great. Blackest Night is my other one. It's kind of right there. The miniseries alone is pretty great. The event, I should say. But I read the whole like 2000 page omnibus of Blackest Night a long time ago, and it's one of my favorite omnibus I've ever read just because the tie-ins for Blackest Night are awesome. And it's just such a great event. It's way better than it had any right to be as a zombie book. And it's so good. So check out Blackest Night if you're a DC fan. Absolutely worth your time. And if you're looking to see what they might do with Green Lantern, with the Lantern show, some of the beginning stuff of Lanterns could be based on the early stuff of Jeff Johns' run. Some of the stuff he might do in like Secret Origin or in Rebirth or in some of the things he does with Hal early. And we are getting an older Hal, and Hal is older in Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run because he had already, turned evil and then died and then came back to life from his Parallax days in the 90s. So if you're interested in figuring out some more Green Lantern stuff for that show, early Johns is probably the place to go. And I assume one of the best thing Johns did in that run was create the whole idea of like the lantern color spectrum. Uh, that's something that's now seminal to the Green Lantern mythology, and I'm fully hoping and expecting that to be in the show and whatever movies they do at some point. So yeah, definitely check that out. And also right next to that, the Tomasi Gleason run of Green Lantern Corps. A lot of people have now fallen in love with, or at least gotten interested in Guy Gardner. That's really, to me, Justice League International is great for Guy Gardner, but I also just really love how they really make him a hero in the Green Lantern Corps run by Gleason and Tomasi. And it's awesome stuff for Kyle as well. So check that out. John's in it too every once in a while. He's great in the big events. So yeah, definitely agree with you on Sinestro Corps War with Blackest Night right there for me. Critical Thinker also says favorite arc of Star Wars 2015. I'd say Scourging of Shu-Torn. It's the most climactic story, and the run pays off of the run, and it pays off a lot of the setup from prior comics. That is a good one, and it's one that's not talked about nearly as much. I love Vader Down. I thought that was a really good arc from Aaron. The Mutiny at Moncala is also a really good one, and definitely an underrated one from Karen Gillan's part of the run. Because when you say 15, most people just think of Jason Aaron, but Karen Gillan really has a great run in the second half. Like all his stuff is really, really good. I think maybe overall the quality is higher than what Aaron does. I think Aaron's just his first three arcs are so good, and it really Star Wars just came flying on the scene with that first arc with Skywalker Strikes, and with what he does in Vader Down right after that, and the Rebel Prison and all that stuff. It was so fun, and it just felt like it really captured that the 70s, 80s Star Wars comics and the original trilogy vibe that people have been wanting to see for such a long time. Aaron really gets the credit, and he did a great job bringing it back. But Gillen's run is very consistent right after, so definitely agree with that. And Scourging Shu-Torun is another really good one.
I mean, that one is my favorite one for sure because that actually kind of completes the Gillen run, right? I believe that
Yeah.
is his last one. So the final shot of Han, Luke, and Leia walking up the ramp of the Millennium Falcon, that should have been the end. Like they even literally talk about like, oh, we found a new base in Hoth and stuff like that. It's like perfect, sweet, awesome. You've got like a full culmination of all their characters, and then for some reason we had to have an extra run with Greg Pak, and it's yeah, yeah. I'm just to this day I hate that that exists. Like there's some interesting characters that have appeared in like the Star Wars 2020 line that originated in that one because they're Pat characters. And I think he does a bit better justice with them. But the very idea of, and I've never loved like that art of like Boba Fett on Mustafar fighting Vader, but that was way more plausible to me than Chewbacca and Vader in a pit fighting each other. I don't know what went wrong there. And then doing a quasi like Ord Mantell bounty hunter scene like as a reference in Empire Strikes Back, kind of making a storyline that's super close to that, but is not like to this day that frustrates me. I skimmed through it, but I didn't really find anything that actually was like important out of it. And I find like it just ruins a lot of what Gillen does for me. So yeah, it's probably the worst arc for me, and that's what like Screaming Citadel and everything. Like when Aaron started really kind of faltering towards the end there, when more of the world building, more of the connectivity was required. The Harbinger arc is not bad, but it's okay. Like Rebel Jail is solid. So I think moment he brings in Scar Squad, his writing starts to kind of fall off because he's trying to make them like big hit characters. They're almost like quasi Bad Batch before we really knew if Bad Batch had survived or not, or like what happened to them in Order 66, and they're almost fitting that kind of slot, but then they're not. Like even their sniper almost seems like he could be Crosshair. Yeah, I don't know. I think I liked how Aaron started. His first 3 arcs are actually quite good. It's just after that, it becomes uneven. And there's that nice little transition arc. I'm trying to remember what it's called.
It's the Jeddah one, right?
No, it was
That's
the one
Aaron
that's like
Gillen's
called
first one.
no, that one I really like too.
Mhm.
Don't I think it's more of the It's the one after Scream City, Out Among the Stars, the one that, like, character kinda gets there, that's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, like, where are we at right now? Who are we now?" Like, that stuff was actually pretty nice. I kinda enjoy that transition, that you're kind of paving the road from the Aaron kind of, like, very classic Star Wars feels to, like, "Hey, like, let's see what's that transition, what are we really building in the back half for these characters?" I actually really like that quite a bit. But it's very clear to me that after everything with Trios, everything that had been first handled from the Jedi arc onwards, from her appearance with Vader and the 2015 line with Gillen, once that was all really handled well and the Scouring show turned, that was the original end. I don't really know
Mhm.
why that ever had to have more. If you're not gonna even address anything that's even more connected to Empire Strikes Back. That's the thing that throws me off. There's nothing about it that's even more well connected to Empire Strikes Back that Scouring Show Turn doesn't already do in its last few panels.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think they were probably in between wanting to continue the Star Wars book and deciding to go completely creatively different. Like, I feel like they never really gave Greg Pak a chance to
No.
really build anything within his comics. It was kind of like, yeah, just write something so we can get to 75 issues. But yeah, everything Gillen does, I'm glad you brought up. I mean, I'm glad Critical Thinker's favorite is Scourging of Shutorn because I feel like nobody talks about the back half of Star Wars
It's so
2015.
good.
Everybody talks about the beginning. And the beginning is great, but it is, I think, the most consistent part is everything from the Jedha arc all the way through show Torn.
Hope
And
Dies, that's a huge
Hope
one.
Dies is great too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually might be my favorite of that. It's a great run, and Kieran Gillen really is the MVP of the early days of Star Wars canon comics. Yeah, thanks for that question. Then Critical Thinker says if Disney wants to tell the story of Rey and Rey's Jedi if the film ever gets made, how should they make Luke's order distinct from hers in future media, given that it's doomed without feeling redundant or just making the entire narrative around it focused on only emphasizing how much of a failure it was? I think really the way you do it is by kind of doing what they did later in Legends, which is you start to mess with and kind of alter and change the philosophy of the Jedi based around who's leading it, right? And so the Jedi Order is a little bit more fundamental under Luke in Legends, but then as Jason and Jaina and everything from the Yuzan Vong War starts to take a bigger have a bigger voice in the Jedi community, you see the Jedi Order continue evolving and changing throughout the New Jedi Order to Legacy of the Force to Fate of the Jedi. Things keep changing, and I think that's the approach they need to take with Rey. Not particularly to take anything out of the Legends books, but to say, hey, what makes Rey different? And the thing that obviously makes her different is that she's the bloodline of the most evil person that the galaxy had seen in the last 1,000 years. And the guy who ruled with an iron fist and arguably is the greatest Sith of all time, and her bloodline is comes from that, and yet she's chosen the good side, chosen the light side. And so a lot of people have come up with the idea of like gray Jedi. I don't like her doing that specifically, but I think what you can do is bring in a lot of the way she maneuvers around the force, the way she looks and at and feels the force, and use her connection to be something that's distinctly different. Not necessarily messing with the Jedi morality. And that's the thing, right? When you're always adapting something from another medium or adapting an original idea, you've got to keep the core. And the Jedi morality is really the core of what the Jedi are, more so than the rules around it and the rules and the view of the Force. But it is that morality, that good, that needs to stay at the heart, while some of the other things that make the Jedi Order can change. And I think one of the things that the sequels try to say, even though we never really see it, is that Luke followed the original idea of the Jedi so dogmatically, tried to just bring back the prequel Jedi that were flawed already, and ultimately it kind of all fell apart. And he does the same thing in Legends. He tries to bring back the prequel Jedi, but he just sticks around and doesn't have, the same issues he has in canon that allows it to evolve and change. And then he has a relationship with change is one of the fundamental rules of the Jedi, and like those things change naturally due to Luke's involvement. Here, we know he starts in canon building his Jedi Order earlier than he did in Legends, because he waits about 10 years after Return of the Jedi to build his Jedi Order in Legends, versus in canon, he's already building it in Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, which is 5 years after Return of the Jedi. So he starts it earlier, but he seems to have a smaller order, not fully going for it, taking on children. I mean, obviously, really all we know about it is from the flashbacks in the films and the rise of Kylo Ren. So I'm sure there's a lot more layers you can add to it, but his order is a little bit more stringent. And I guess that's the big thing with Rey. And it's one of the reasons I would love to just see either survivors, adult survivors of Ben Solo's attack that lived on past the sequels into Rey's timeline, or Force sensitives who never joined Luke's Jedi Order, who were just out there and really powerful Force users, all kind of culminate under one figurehead. I'd love to see all these different philosophies and kind of the thing they've done with canon, with like creating all these different Force religions and Jedi and all the convocation of the Force and all these different things they've created. I mean, even with somebody like Lor San Tekka in the sequels, bring all these different things in and let Rey be kind of this mitigator of the group of Force users, and kind of bring in all these different philosophies around her version of the Jedi. Because I think that's what you do, is you really go in on what they've built in canon so far, and you double that, and yeah, she's going different than anybody we've seen in Legends, and she's Force in her own way. That would be actually Rey's Jedi Order.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to really answer. I think at the end of the day, when you look at, I mean, I'm gonna try to answer it a little bit closer to what I think you're looking for here. Critical thinker of like, okay, is Luke just doomed? Is everything gonna have to be storytelling wise doomed about him? I don't think so. I think, like, it's like, well, that's almost like a half glass empty, that you have to assume everything about it is a failure. But how do you make it different? I mean, well, one, it's gonna be different no matter what. Like, we know of plenty of Order 66 survivors that have, like, potential to have, like, already explored and branched out in different ways amongst the Force before Luke is ever, like, connected. Like, that's one really interesting thing about, Ahsoka and Luke being connected. It's like, yeah, she'll maybe have a little bit more sympathy and happiness of seeing a good Skywalker and like two Skywalkers having the Force and all that, of the, children of her old master. Maybe she's a little bit blind to that and she doesn't really spend a lot of time around it. But there, on the flip side, I kinda almost wanna see, like, what she sees and what she's trying to inform him, like, what was wrong about, like, how the Jedi Order treated me, like, what they did to Anakin, what they did to everybody, right? Like, I'd love to see perspectives like that, and I think that's what distinguishes us from Legends no matter what. Legends, we just have, like, green Jedi, we have entire lineages of Jedi families. There's more of an emphasis on, like, there isn't a lot of Jedi, like, but whatever Jedis we do have almost seem like they're derived from long ancient families in many ways, which is, like, I get it. It's kind of cool, but it again runs into that same issue that so much of the EU had of making everything too small, making everything feel way too connected and like boxed in. So that'll always be the difference. Now we know what the prequel Jedi really were like. You can't really have a character like Camp Solusar entirely work because his father and everything that was going on there just doesn't line up with everything in Order 66. Green Jedi never really made sense in the EU. We just kinda, like, accepted it over time, but, like, that's not a concept that, like, fits almost anywhere in canon and, what we see from the prequel Jedi. Now we've really seen George's vision, and we've seen not only the Legends versions of that, like, people who built out different characters that have continued, like a Shard Het and all that, but we've seen canon versions like Cal Kestis and what that means for them to be alive and moving forward and all that. So I think we're gonna see a lot of those Order 66 survivors. I would not be surprised if a lot of them are just fundamentally opposed to Luke because he is the son of Vader, right? Like that's something that Luke probably is a lot more open about. We know that Leia doesn't get outed as the daughter of Vader until she's running for first senator, right? And bloodline. So she's got 30 something years before that really becomes an issue for her. So I'm very curious to see which Order 66 survivors would actually be cool with him, who wouldn't be cool with him, right? Like who might actively work against him. Like it could be just philosophical discussions and all that, but it could also almost be like fundamentally like Luke continuously having to prove himself again and again against to these people, and they might just really die off one on one, right? They might slowly be chased out and like hunted so that Luke doesn't really have people that he can rely on, right? Who's to say that the Sith Eternal can't be fleshed out and expanded? Who's to say that, like, these Order 66 Jedi who could have actually given him the full truth aren't also being hunted down by Palpatine and the First Order and all that? It'd be very interesting to see that in almost every direction that Luke steps, someone is actually actively working against him, right? Not putting then all this blame on him to be doomed, more like he's fighting a war that's on multiple fronts that he can't. So I think it'll be very interesting to see, differences in thoughts, but, like, differences in, just who survives and who doesn't by the time they can actually reach and connect with Luke. We also have, like, the extended, media really pushing into him, exploring a lot of the High Republic lore, Santeca, the Church of the Force, and everything. How does he get influenced by the High Republic era Jedi? They're the actual peak of the Jedi. They are the golden age of the Jedi, and this is when they fundamentally first transform and get onto the path to where they are to become the Jedi that we see in the prequels, right? How does that line up with what he knows from his father, what he knows from Yoda and Obi-Wan, right? That's a big question we don't know have answered. So the more he learns all these things, yes, the sequels and The Last Jedi especially kind of implies that he's really fundamentalist with the prequel Jedi philosophy, but we don't have to be stuck and beholden by that necessarily. It's almost like the more he learns about it, the more confusing, the more debilitating it might become to him that he's almost like, I have to stick to these fundamentals. That's maybe why he's like, I need to go find the ancient Jedi temple and find the purest of the text and all that. All right. Like there's a lot of ways to connect the pieces that are there throughout all the media that we have so far and have him really struggle with this. Right. And we still see him be a fundamentally great Jedi, not necessarily a master, but a great Jedi than we see in like Shadow of the Sith. He demonstrates almost like EU like potential, the way he like jumps on speeder bikes, the way he like uses the force. Like there's some really insanely cool things and powers that he has there. So we don't have to like just say like it's all over and done. Maybe this is just the first time that we see in the Rise of Kylo Ren. The first time he's like, okay, I can't get these adults with me because one, they're getting picked off, and two, their attachment to me is almost like kind of becoming like a target on their backs, right? And the philosophies that we're coming up with is just becoming more and more complicated. Two, like maybe it is better like to avoid the issues with my father and actually train from a younger age, more voluntarily, more open for sure, but get as close to what the prequel Jedi did right. Like there's gonna be so many ways and avenues to explore that. And like Liam was saying, at the end of the day, I still think we're gonna have adult survivors. I don't think they all get blown up by a lightning explosion that is half on Ben, half on the manipulation of the Force and Palpatine, the way the Rise of Kylo Ren implies it, right? Like there's many ways to still have Luke's legacy continue. But what'll probably happen by the time we get to Rey's Jedi Order with her actually having the ancient text is that she might look at all this and be like, I don't want to try to follow the same path of trying to rebuild everything. Maybe let's just try to make it completely new. Maybe there's way more of a better sense of compartmentalizing stuff. Like, hey, if the head is cut off, like another one still survives. That's where characters like Finn can become really important, where he has his own version, like maybe of like the Kip Duron S Jedi that are a little bit more militant, a little bit more active in the galaxy. Maybe she's a little bit more of the peacekeepers, Qui-Gon Jinn style, like exploring the Force and letting it call to them as way seekers, kind of building out different factions of Jedi who fall under one banner but aren't necessarily stuck on one thing, almost have their own kind of convocation of the Force, but it's between these different Jedi sects. That's probably the best way for her, I'd say. So that way you have new knowledge continuously be created, old knowledge that can still permeate, where Order 66 and older survivors can still have influence, but you don't have like this confusion of like Luke being like, we're trying to make one way happen. And the more he learns, the harder it gets. And the more that his name is attached to all these older Jedi, that the bigger target that he might be putting on their backs.
Yeah, and there's the conversation going on in the chat too about, the redundancies of Luke's Jedi Order versus the prequel Jedi Order, and how do you make Rey's to the point where it pacifies fans maybe. If she succeeds and Luke doesn't, the connections to and critical thinker brings up the connections too between Luke and Vader. But I think the significant difference, obviously, between Luke and Vader and Rey and Palpatine is one, Palpatine's never been good ever in his life,
Yeah.
versus Vader was a great Jedi and an evil Sith. But ultimately, Luke's last impression of Vader was seeing him save him and turn good again, and that was Luke's thing. Is Luke is this like great redeemer throughout the trilogy. He's the one that brings his father back from the darkness that nobody else could, and he brings him back and helps him become the chosen one. And so I think that's a fundamental difference versus the way Rey has to kill her father slash grandfather at the end of the movie, and she just obliterates him with his own force lightning, right? Like that's different. And also, it's one thing to be, the child of Vader and see your father do something good versus be the created, manufactured spawn of the worst evil ever and have to go against what's kind of in your DNA, right? So I think there's big differences there right off the bat. But as for the Luke thing with the prequel Jedi, I mean, it is something that like you have to individualize. Skywalker's Academy is hitting the nail on the head there as well with like what Luke's points are in the Last Jedi is that it wasn't his hubris alone that made everything fall to the dark side. It was the way he tried to micromanage everything after saving the galaxy and ultimately feeling responsible as this legend, as this huge figure. That's the main stark difference between him and canon versus him in Legends, right? Because in Legends, he might disagree with other people's views on the Force, but he's very open to listening. He's very peaceful and respectful, and he's, somebody who wants to hear what you have to say, even if he completely disagrees with you. In canon, maybe more so because there aren't other adult Jedi that he can rely on, other mentors, other tutors. He seems to just put the weight of the world on his shoulders. He seems to isolate himself from everybody else. It's a probably a if you want to go on based on what we have now, it could be a symptom of not having that support system via Amara or a child, and Ben not having Leia be as actively involved in what he's doing, but yet raising Leia's son, basically. The weight he feels as this kind of savior figure throughout the galaxy, constantly being this legend. I mean, one big thing in canon, it's not something I've ever personally loved, but big thing in canon is that he's this mythical figure. People don't think he's actually real. Personally, I don't really understand that because like you see him save the galaxy, he would be a face of the galaxy up into the last 6 years before The Force Awakens, 5 years before The Force Awakens, right? So if you were born within that time period, maybe you don't know who he is. But if you're born before, I feel like you should know Luke Skywalker was a real person. But that's the point of view that they've brought into canon, is that people like Rey on a planet like Jakku, a backwater planet, doesn't know he actually exists, thinks he might just be a fairy tale. Same with some books they've referenced that as well, that tie into the Last Jedi and the Rise of Skywalker. So Luke is this larger than life figure in canon, whereas in Legends he's a little bit more personable and relatable. He connects to people. He takes people like Gantoris into his Jedi Order, and he learns from them. And when he has time with these elders, he's taking it all in. Versus in canon, he seems to kind of jump in right away and be like, "No, this is how I got to do it. I got to find all these artifacts. I have to, find the ancient Jedi texts. I have to do it the way I'm supposed to do it." And so I think Skywalker's Academy, another interesting point too, you brought up in terms of like the Legends argument, but I also think it's interesting for canon is his connection to the Force Ghosts, because in Legends, obviously Obi-Wan leaves him in Heir to the Empire, and he's there briefly just in Triss Bakura at the end of the right after Endor. He's not really involved in anything Luke does, and neither is Yoda. But in canon, I mean, now we have Anakin, who wasn't prevalent in Legends in the 90s, right? Anakin's now a super prevalent character. We've already seen a little bit of Anakin with Luke in Shadow of the Sith. You have Yoda, you have Obi-Wan. Yoda appears to him in The Last Jedi, right? Decades later after Return of the Jedi, which he doesn't do in Legends. How do the Force Ghosts shape how Luke feels about the Jedi Order, and how do they not? Because ultimately, kind of the way his order falls apart, it doesn't seem like he's talking to the Force Ghosts very much. So how isolated does he really get? And I think those are all the things you have to touch on. I mean, and we're here to just spit out ideas, but ultimately it's going to take years and decades of world building and storytelling within different mediums to accomplish really ironing out Luke's order. But in Rey's is coming up in a galaxy that, like I said earlier, with Starfighter, has no central government. The one that wins is fractured and basically completely devoid of leadership in the military and in the political realm. I mean, basically all the politicians, all the top tier politicians in the galaxy died that would have been sympathetic to the New Republic. And then the ones that make it to The Last Jedi, ultimately Leia dies and she's the figurehead of the galaxy. So you have this completely lawless, amorphous government vacuum. You have Rey emerging within that. Do people find out she's related to Palpatine, which obviously will give her a massive disadvantage at recruiting people to her side? There's a lot of factors that are related to the trust and the build around Rey. And so it'll be interesting to see how they align her to whatever the government is, whether Finn's very aligned with that, whether Poe is, all that type of stuff really will define her as a specific Jedi leader. But you have to double down and you have to go into the mission statement at the end of the movie of The Rise of Skywalker, whether it's something you hate or you love. It's the fact that she's accepting both the lineages of the Skywalkers and the Palpatines, and that's kind of the point of the movie. So in order to improve that, in order to really make that something that makes a little more sense than it does at the end of the movie, you gotta really use it as like her worldview is now built on this mission of self-discovery that she has in The Rise of Skywalker, and ultimately that kind of makes her finally find her path because she's searching for her family the whole time. But yeah, good questions. Thank you guys. I think we should run through some more before, continuing on that point, because we do have a few more to get through tonight, and we're already almost at the 2-hour mark. So let's get to Brandon Tran's question here, who says, after seeing 2025 Superman, do you think James Gunn will eventually set up his Justice League within Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, and Martian Manhunter, similar to the animated show, Justice League Unlimited? Yeah, I absolutely do. I think he should. The members of the Justice League who have been there in every iteration are Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Flash, Aquaman, and Martian Manhunter. So I think they should do that. Personally, I know I reference this a lot on our live streams, but I wrote an outline for the DCU in college, and I wrote a lot of stuff. And my thing was, I think they should have done like kind of a Trinity movie before they do a Justice League movie, just because it's so much to build up to and it would take so long. And the Justice League can't really be the Justice League without all those characters. So you need to do a Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman kind of team up. And I love the idea of this Superman family movie that they're working on for the Superman sequel, because I think it just continues to build the world. It'd be nice if you get these like standalone movies that really identify the character, find a particular flaw or character, a moment that can really define their internal struggle, and you take that struggle and you build it into the larger universe. For me, that was with my ideas, it was, Batman being a loner, being somebody who is always depressed and has to find, the joy in life again. And my version of Batman was always going to be about how he finds that joy again. And then obviously he's not going to become Adam West, but he's going to at least reconnect with his family and then move on into Nightwing. And then you bring in Robins and all of that type of stuff. I don't think they're going specifically that direction, but the kind of Damian Wayne story is kind of a redemption of Batman. It's kind of a reclamation of the idea of Batman as a father figure. So I think they're doing a variation of that. And then Wonder Woman will be interesting to see how they tackle it, because we've gotten a true origin story for Wonder Woman, but it was a period piece. Be interesting if they do another true origin story for her, but put her in the modern day. So we will see. But yeah, I think you have to have those three. And I would personally do a Trinity movie first, or some variation of calling it that, or you can call it Justice League, but it's just the three of them. But you have to, at some point, if you're going to truly do the Justice League, you have to have Green Lantern, Flash, Martian Manhunter, and Aquaman if you're going to do a full Justice League movie.
Yeah, I mean, I can add to this. Obviously, Liam knows way more about DC than me, but I know that Justice Gang is a little different than what we've kind of had. This is not really something that has a lot of foundations in the comics. It's got obviously a lot of these characters pop up, but I think it'll be interesting to see if Justice can kind of be the natural building out point, and then we get the JLA or whatever, just pure Justice League that we're going to call it. And then from there, I wouldn't be surprised if you have like Guy Gardner split off, maybe Jolo's Blue Beetle if he gets appearance in Peacemaker or something like that. They get to kind of play out and bring out a new group of like Justice League International, kind of like split up and like West Coast, East Coast Avengers. That's like I'm very curious why the need for a Justice Gang, but I do think it's just to like set some foundation pieces where there are characters that are there from the start that aren't like, oh, these are like just second tier like Justice League members. These are people who are like founding members even before a Batman kind of plays into hands, before a Wonder Woman kind of joins up the team, where you still allow these characters that are still the big hitters have their main incarnation and still come later in the universe to kind of tie in with Superman and Batman. But then you still have like these characters that are like, well, we've been metahumans for quite a long time. We shouldn't have to just be pushed out because you're stronger and have more marketing value, right? Like, I think it'll be very interesting if Justice Gang is the foundation piece to kind of split up these two different Justice League teams that happen at the same time. So I think that will allow us to have Justice League in movies, but have a different Justice League in TV shows, have some crossover, have like the Justice League Unlimited version happen where like everybody is Justice League. It'll just have different characters kind of pop in and out. But I expect Justice League as a whole to almost be its own like revolving door, its own sort of character that changes between movies, between different mediums throughout the DC, which I think will be a great way to distinguish from what we've got from the Avengers, right? I mean, that's the weirdest thing about Avengers right now that we have kind of leading into Doomsday is that we technically have two Avengers teams. The main one, which we've never seen any character from besides Sam Wilson, and then the new Avengers, which are just the Thunderbolts and Sentry and Bucky, right? So it would have been nice to have East Coast and West Coast Avengers leading into Doomsday. I think that would have made a lot more sense. But it's they're kind of sort of trying that same concept here. It would have been nice to see Bucky and Sam actually have some real conversations and splitting up of appearances, like differences, actually on screen. But this is one thing that James Gunn, as much as I never really understood why Justice Gang was here, I think he's actually allowed himself to have a foundation where he can go any which way and have multiple iterations of Justice League happen.
Yeah, I think you're on to something there. I personally always felt that like Justice Gang was basically kind of a knockoff version of Justice Society, but with just kind of outlining that there are superhero teams out there prior to the Justice League,
Yeah.
but without actually doing Justice Society. And on that mural, like almost all the characters are the Golden Age JSA characters and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of something like that. But where I do think where you're onto something is that I think they are going to build these teams, and what they really could do is say, hey, Batman and Superman, they're our marquee characters, and we decide to do, maybe instead of Trinity, they do World's Finest next for those two characters. But then Justice League doesn't have them in it, or they're not in it as much, which would, be what they originally did with Justice League, which was it was Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Aquaman, Flash, and Martian Manhunter, and there was no Batman and Superman in that team because they already were selling books well. They could kind of do that thing where you elevate these characters in a team up movie, but yet you don't have the big ones in there, so that you can give some shine to some other characters and then start to pull back a little bit and then add Batman and Superman in after. be interesting if they did that. I think just they're just so iconic and so much a part of the image of most people with Justice League. It'd be interesting to see them, united. But I think one of the things too James Gunn's trying to show us is there are teams of characters, but they're only a team because they're getting paid to be. And I think what will truly be interesting is once you see Superman and Batman meet, the way their ideologies, while extremely different, ultimately they're really searching for the same thing. They have the same goal. That reluctant friendship will be maybe the thing that forms the first Justice team out of pure good rather than, hey, we can make money doing this. So that'll be interesting to see. I can't wait to see what he does there, but I'm hoping for a Justice League movie within the next 5 to 6 years. I'm really hoping for a Batman movie within the next 5 years or so. That's not the Batman 2, but we shall see. We have time for maybe 1 to 2 more. So we'll go with Brandon Tran here. It says, do you think for Avengers Doomsday, Robert Downey Jr. will make Doctor Doom the most terrifying and tragic villain similar to Thanos in Infinity War like he was in the comics and shows? That's what I'm really scared about, Brandon, is Doctor Doom is arguably, not arguably, he is, if not the best villain in all of Marvel comics, the second best behind Magneto. And I'm just really worried they're going to have to kill him off after these, and we're not going to get the full Doctor Doom that we need, for the MCU. And um, I liken a lot of characters to Loki when we're talking about superheroes, because Loki's the one character in superhero films that's been a villain, mostly stayed a villain the whole time, and continued to be in like everything. Every Thor movie, he was in the Avengers, then he shows up in Infinity War and Endgame, eventually gets his own show, and they kind of turned him into an anti-hero, and ultimately he's a hero by the end of season 2. But Doctor Doom should really be that way, the same way Magneto is in every X-Men movie. He's just fundamental to the Fantastic Four. He's fundamental to the MCU. He should be in every Fantastic Four story. So I just get worried with Robert Downey Jr. that they're going to, I think, could make him as terrifying as Thanos and maybe as tragic as Thanos. But I'm worried they're going to kill him off, and then you lose a lot of that story that just makes him so compelling, that connection to Reed and all of that stuff. So here's hoping they don't, but I don't think he'll be as good as Thanos. I personally just don't think so, just because we've had no build up to him. We built up the Thanos for 11 years. They just haven't done anything for Doomsday, but I think what they're really going to play on is just your emotional attachment to Robert Downey Jr. already, and how they connect that to Tony Stark. That will be the tragedy behind Doom, more so than the actual Doom from the comics that we know.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's like with all these people making AI edits and all that, like I saw some garbage one on Twitter of like Tom Holland's Peter Parker and like are surrounded by everyone who's been like defeated, and you take out the mask and you still see like 2017 Robert Downey Jr. with, you know, the very hilarious Iron Man like stylings of his mustache and beards, and it's like, well, one, he doesn't look like that anymore, and two, I think they're gonna make sure that he looks his own character. But again, they're still playing on like that's still close enough to Tony Stark, right? So yes, they're calling him Victor Von Doom. How much of that is true, I'm not really sure. But the more I've been reading like leaks and rumors and like just trying to keep up with all this stuff, the more it does feel like they're trying to make these two movies, if not maybe like a three-parter Avenger movie, because we still don't know if like they're gonna fit in a Doctor Strange 3 or something between in Doomsday and what we got going on in Secret Wars. That like, yes, this is the final run for the X-Men characterizations, right? The Fox X-Men ones, and they're still trying to like kind of merge them sort of quasi as close as they can to X-Men 97, because that's what people like still. But you're still bringing in all those old actors, so you can't make such a dramatically different thing. Even if they aren't exactly the Fox X-Men, you're still trying to play off of that nostalgia there. Then obviously you got all of these Marvel characters that have been kinda sidelined, have kind of been, like, popped up between phase 4 through 6, but haven't really gotten any team affiliations or haven't really gotten much their due or just been kinda panned. Then you got a lot of the characters from phase 1 to 3 and where they're at, like, we're kind of building all these different things, and Loki, from what I can tell, is gonna be, like, arranging maybe his own team or warning specific heroes. We've also got, like, the ones from Sony, right? Like, the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. Like, there's so many different characters and so many different studios that are all being kinda merged here, and I think the way that I'm looking at Doom, and I think what a lot of these scoopers are looking at is, we don't really know what type of Doom we're gonna get. We don't know why exactly we're getting Downey as Doom, but whatever this Doom does will kind of create the actual 616. Like, there should have always been X-Men. There should have always been Fantastic Four. Like, it should not have been an MCU that almost started off very much like Ultimate MCU, like the Ultimate Marvel comics, and then quasi started to change more into the classic 60s to 80s Marvelization that we've kind of gone here in more recent years. And you could say part blame some of that on Kang too, with the sacred timeline that he kind of held and created. Now we got the Tree of Life that is being held together by Loki, and that's still also pretty good. But now that's probably going to be hunted down by Doom. It'll be very interesting to see if, like, yes, Doom does all this horrible stuff and he, wins in Doomsday, but loses in Secret Wars, but he ultimately still wins, and maybe he eradicates all these Downey Iron Man-esque variants of Doom and actually has us lead into a proper Victor Von Doom. Like, it'd almost be very interesting if, while there is a bit of nihilism to Thanos, he's almost, like, justified in doing everything right, so that way the universe is better with or without him. I think it'll be very interesting if you can kinda almost invert that and be like, "Okay, this Downey's Doom doesn't know if he survives into the future or not either, but he wants to guarantee, like, I want the right balance between everything here. Like, we shouldn't have an 828, we shouldn't have a 616, we shouldn't have whatever the Fox X-Men are and all their contradictions. It should all be happening at once, right? And maybe that's the real timeline that's gonna be gifted out of the multiverse drama and shenanigans, right? So I can really say no real answer to what sort of Doom we're gonna get. I think the whole idea of maybe him interacting with Franklin at the end is to start playing with the 616 vibes of everything and then be like, "No, I wanna still be in charge. I still wanna be one of those top villains, but I want everyone on the same playing field instead of, like, jumping all around." Maybe that's what's gonna separate him from Thanos. Even when he loses, he still sorta wins, which Thanos doesn't really get, right? I'm sure we'll maybe also see him pull out Thanos' spine and crumble him to dust like that iconic comic panel that's always on, like, comic book Twitter and TikTok and all that. But I think the ultimate difference is that he recreates their universe properly in a way, and it's fundamentally more sound than whatever Thanos' plan was, right? This will actually put everything back together. Like, what Thanos did led into that butterfly effect of Steve Rogers kind of going back in his own timeline, Iron Man doing the one thing that Doctor Strange sees amongst all of the possibilities. Maybe his victory is actually getting it all corrected and having the proper 616. And at the end of the day, it's just because of commercial reasons. They want to have everything all put together. But it would be kind of interesting if you can make a creative story out of that, of like, we never truly had every right piece in this timeline in the first place.
Mhm.
Everything that you believed in still also had falsitudes even when we thought it was first corrected. And it's a good way to get people who basically dropped off at Endgame to be like, "Yeah, no, I wanna, like, have a sequel to Endgame, right? I wanna have a sequel to all that storytelling that's done there, have the little pieces that you remember, have the nostalgia of Tobey and Hugh Jackman Wolverine and Ryan Reynolds Deadpool, like, kind of pop in and show up and integrate themselves too." But yeah, I mean, I think that's really why we're doing this, Downey. Like, we're trying to make a sequel to Endgame. We're not trying to make a sequel to anything that happened in Phase 4, Phase 5 either, because the chances to do that would have been making Avengers films or some sort of team films at the end of each of those phases, and we never did. We introduced a new team in Eternals that completely flopped. Fantastic Four is doing fine, but it's not a big hit. It kinda cannibalized itself trying to fight off Superman and the huge wave of, like, hype that it got. This is our best chance. Like, Thunderbolts is our sadly, our most sound team right now, and that's not the state of Marvel. That's not where it should be, and so that's why maybe these films are gonna be focused on, like, correcting the universe and making a proper 616, and that's why we're getting that Tony Stark Doom.
I think that's absolutely it, because that is the plot of Secret Wars. It's Secret Wars, the 2017, I can't remember what year, but the new version of Secret Wars,
Yeah.
not the original Battle World with, selling action figures, Black Suit Spider-Man. The new one is just, it's Marvel's version of Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's taking
Yeah.
everything and merging it all together, and then in it, Doom makes his battle world, simplifies the Marvel universe, and then with the destruction of that battle world, everything comes back to normal, and everybody who was across the different dimensions come into the same one. So that is the point of this whole thing, and I absolutely think that's going to happen. And I think but there's no reason to cast Robert Downey Jr. without playing on the Iron Man thing. Like, they are absolutely going to play on Iron Man. They are going to basically say, hey, what if the guy who was the savior of the universe, who died in the last saga saving everything, is ultimately the one now you have to defeat to save the world again. And that they're going to play on that. I don't think he could be named Victor Von Doom, but I don't think he's going to be Victor Von Doom. He's going to be Tony Stark, either adopted by the Von Dooms and becoming the Prince of Latveria, or Tony Stark who's taken on this identity because of something tragic that's happened in his life. He's going to be an alternate Tony Stark. There's no other way to tell that story without it, because there's no buildup. Like I said earlier, there's no buildup. So your emotional connection to the character is zilch. So you have to build on the emotional connection we already have to Robert Downey as Tony Stark and Iron Man. And so I think they're going to do that. I think it will ultimately work. I just don't know if it'll hit as hard as Thanos because of how much we built up to Thanos. But I do think Doom will be formidable. They have to make him formidable. He will hypothetically be more powerful than Thanos, because we just have to get bigger and bigger with everything, right? But and then as for your next question, Brandon, like, just to finalize this, yes, I think Franklin will be one of the big MacGuffins of the whole thing, because I think I could see Franklin being the one who creates the universe for the entire Marvel, the history of Marvel films, the culmination, the reunification of everything. Franklin will probably be the one that creates the universe or merges the universes together, i.e., in a way, the same way as Alexander Luthor does in Crisis. They're very similar characters, like very, very, very similar characters, Alexander Luthor and Franklin. And I don't know if we're gonna get into the more, like, I don't know, deep cut sides of Secret Wars with, like, Molecule Man and stuff like that. So I think it will be Franklin, and I think we'll see an adult Franklin. And I think one of the things that would be interesting on top of that too is, if we see an adult Franklin, could there be a hidden actor maybe cast as actual Dr. Victor Von Doom, in the movie, where, like, when Robert Downey dies, ultimately at the end, there is a real, I forgot what Earth number Fantastic Four are, but they're like, there's a real Doctor Doom that's put in his place, and ultimately so concludes the story of Tony Stark. And I don't think we should count out either Robert Downey Jr. also playing Iron Man again in these movies. Like, I think he very well could be Iron Man in these movies on top of being Doctor Doom, and he could be, they could kind of do this whole, throwing it back to Crisis again, but they could kind of do this whole, like, multiple versions of Tony Stark are like the unification process for everything kind of merging. Like, just like we have the three Supermans in Crisis, you have, Superman Earth 2, Superman Prime, and Superman Earth 1, or Superboy Prime, and they're the ones that are kind of at the heart of the merge. Be really interesting. I can't wait to see what they do. I can't wait to see how deep cut they get. Can't wait to see how weird and like, just kind of out there, kind of trippy comic stuff they do. But I'm looking forward to it nonetheless. And that's probably going to wrap up our stream tonight. We went for 2 hours and 20 minutes in this kind of jumbo episode since we missed last week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Had a lot of great discussions tonight about Starfighter and Visions and all that stuff. So thank you so much for joining. If you are watching on replay, make sure you leave your comments down below. We will respond to your comments, but make sure you join us every week. Every Tuesday we go live discussing all the latest Star Wars news and taking your guys' questions. The way things have been going, next week will probably be a heavy question week. So, because we had 2 weeks of news to cover, we didn't get through as many questions tonight, but make sure you bring those questions back next week so we can discuss all of your thoughts on everything Star Wars. And like we did tonight, you can talk about Marvel, DC, whatever you want to discuss in the chat. Bring it next week so we can discuss. Make sure you check out the videos that are on our channel. Just dropped the comic tier list last week, so make sure you check that out. We did for the High Republic, excuse me, and we also dropped the High Republic book tier list the week before. We have an overall review of the comics coming out this week. Still have shorts out 3 days a week. Still have polls out twice a day, every day. Content ramping up as usual on Star Wars Lads. So make sure you check all of that stuff out. Make sure you like the video if you haven't as well, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks so much for watching this week's stream, everybody, and we will see you all next week.